You're watching CNN. I'm Julia Chatterley in New York. This hour, two guests crucial to both the present and the future of Ukraine. We'll hear from the CEO of the firm that owns the Azovstal steel plant in Mariupol, currently surrounded by Russian forces, and the head of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, the EBRD, the organisation built to help post-Soviet states fight for democracy. For now, Mariupol on the brink of falling into Russian hands. The last remaining soldiers and hundreds of civilians are making a defiant stand in the Azovstal steel plant in the southeast of the city. The Kremlin says it can seize control of the plant in 3 to 4 days, though Vladimir Putin today says storming the area is no longer necessary, having blocked all means of escape. Russia's president says he's offering a, quote, dignified treatment to anyone who surrenders. He's calling the Kremlin's effort to capture Mariupol a success. Yet overnight, Russian forces continue to bombard the battered city. Earlier Thursday, 4 evacuation buses were able to leave through a humanitarian corridor. And in a warning to the West, Russia has tested a new nuclear-capable intercontinental ballistic missile, sometimes referred to as Satan II. Putin said it should make Russia's enemies, quote, think twice and give them food for thought. Meanwhile, in Kyiv, the Prime Ministers of Spain and Denmark have arrived for meetings with President Zelensky. Pedro Sanchez and Mette Frederiksen appeared together and promised to deliver concrete support to Ukraine. And Matt Rivers is in Lviv and has the latest.
Well, Julia, the horrific situation in Mariupol continues as we learn that a planned evacuation corridor that was set up yesterday did not work as planned. Let's start with the latest headlines, though, from President Zelensky, who says that Ukraine at the moment does not have the amount of heavy weaponry that it would need to take back the city of Mariupol. A nod, I think, to the fact that Ukraine continues to ask for more weapons, heavy weapons from the West, especially as they would face, or they do face, an ongoing assault by Russia in the Donbass region. The idea that they have enough weapons to go around, not only to fight that front, but also to liberate Mariupol in some sort of counteroffensive. Zelensky basically saying he doesn't have that ability. Vladimir Putin on Thursday basically claiming victory in Mariupol, even though there continues to be Ukrainian resistance centered on the Azovstal steel plant complex, where we know fighters on the Ukraine side remain. Putin basically acknowledged that and said that Russia does not need to go in there and clear out every single one of those soldiers. He said that they should just seal it off, and congratulated his military for a victory in Mariupol, as he called it. Of course, the Ukrainian side denies that the city of Mariupol has fallen, claiming there still is Ukrainian resistance there. This is some 120,000 civilians, according to Zelensky, in and around Mariupol, still need to be evacuated. And there was hope, Julia, that on Wednesday, a humanitarian corridor that had been agreed to between both sides could facilitate the evacuation of several thousand, at least, civilians from Mariupol. But unfortunately, that did not happen, with Ukrainian officials saying only four buses carrying civilians managed to make it out of that city. The Ukrainians blaming the Russian side, saying that they were disorganized and that they actually broke a ceasefire that did not allow for the safe evacuation of those citizens, something that we have seen, or at least heard, the Russians be accused of multiple times throughout this war. So this dire situation in the city of Mariupol continues, as so many citizens, so many ordinary people still need to be evacuated. Julia.
Matt Rivers there. Now, as the battle in the east for the Donbass region continues, Ukrainians who survived Russia's brutal attack on their homes are trying to work out what next, while fearing life will never be the same. CNN's Phil Black has been hearing their stories.
Andrei Binchenko says his life will be forever split in two, before and after the day the Russians came. He remembers the skies over his home in Hostomel, near Kiev, suddenly swarming with dozens of attack helicopters. He says they flew in a low formation, like they were on parade. And soon after, he says, Russian ground forces approached his home. This is where he says they opened fire from a distance. An explosive round landed close by, fracturing his leg. Shrapnel piercing much of his body. But Andrei says he was lucky. He got to hospital before the Russians worked out he used to fight pro-Moscow separatists in eastern Ukraine. He says many veterans from the East were deliberately killed during the occupation. If I had not been wounded, I would have been shot too, he says. Vasily Hilko also survived Russia's occupation, but at great cost. Vasily was shocked by the Russian numbers and firepower that rolled into Bogdanivka, a tiny village northeast of the capital. So many tanks passed, he said, so much ammunition. Every house had 20 soldiers occupying it, including the house where he, his neighbours and family were sheltering. They stayed in the basement, the Russians moved in above. One night, Vasily says, 4 drunk soldiers pushed open the basement door and screamed, "Everyone out by the count of 10, or all will be killed." Vasily says women were screaming, children crying, and as he was the last one through the door, he was blasted from behind with a shotgun. He says nothing was left of the leg, all bones destroyed, just a puddle of blood in minutes. He says 2 days later, some Russian soldiers helped him get to hospital. He still thinks they're beasts, not people. The Russian invasion of areas around Kiev violently interrupted and ended many people's lives, and some would somehow survive brutal, intimate encounters, leaving them forever changed. Phil Black, CNN, Bogdanivka, Ukraine.
And later this hour, President Biden is expected to provide an update on the war in Ukraine from the White House, and we will bring that to you live the moment it happens. For now, in Washington, several finance ministers, including US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, walked out of a G20 meeting yesterday in protest when Russia's finance minister began to speak. Economic officials from around the world are joining World Bank and IMF meetings to discuss how to contain the fallout from the war. And Richard Quest is there for us. That was the isolationist scene setter, I think, Richard, going into these meetings. And obviously Ukraine is going to dominate the agenda, but also the spillover effects. And for some of these policymakers, how do you now set policy in a world of materially slowing growth and ongoing rising prices? And that's the challenge too.
It is, and it is the most difficult challenge they've faced, arguably more difficult in a sense than pandemic or global financial crisis, because in those situations they had firepower and they knew what needed to be done. Now you have slowing growth, you have very high inflation, highest for 40 odd years, and you have a war that's pushing up commodity prices. So, Julia, whether you talk about the OECD, the developed economies, whether you talk about the developing emerging economies, or the hipper, highly indebted countries, they are all facing extraordinary difficulties. And the IMF and World Bank don't really have any major solutions other than keep doing what you're doing and try not to do any harm to anybody else. But the war in Ukraine has really made it much more difficult. Good example, as you said yesterday, the Russian finance minister started to speak. He was speaking virtually from Moscow, and Janet Yellen and the others all walked out. And the reason, very simple. They said they were not prepared to sit and listen to Russia speak and hold the agenda whilst they were prosecuting this war. There'll be more of that over the next couple of days. The IMFC, the various other bodies. The IMF and World Bank meetings are very difficult this year.
You could ask a question about why the Russians were even present and allowed to participate in that G20 meeting, but that's a separate question, which I know will take us on a completely separate tangent. Not to mention some of the other problems. The fact that whole swathes of the world still struggling with the pandemic, the challenge of climate change, and all the things that are having a broader impact on the world that also need to be discussed at this moment. Richard, you are going to be discussing many of these things. Tell us who's coming up and why we should tune in to Quest Means Business later.
Yes, they are the spring meetings of the IMF and World Bank. And on Quest Means Business tonight, you'll have the president of the World Bank and the managing director of the IMF, the two top people, to discuss the situation. But what I'm going to try to get out of them tonight is what needs to be done, rather than just a restating of how awful the position is. And on that question of the G20, I think most of them would love to kick Russia out, but there has to be unanimity or at least general agreement, and China will never agree, has already said so, to Russia being excluded from the G20. So Lord knows what will happen when there's the leaders meeting in Bali in Indonesia later this year.
Yeah, and I like your point. Let's talk about action and the response as opposed to debating the problems that we know are out there. Yeah. Can't wait for that. I'm looking forward to it. Richard Quest, thank you.
Thank you.
Now, lockdown nightmare in Shanghai. This new social media video shows an elderly woman who appears to be arguing with a COVID worker who's trying to send her back to the quarantine centre. The seemingly endless COVID lockdown leading to rare protests in the city of more than 25 million people. David Culver has the latest.
Shanghai residents pushing back after nearly 3 weeks of lockdown. These videos circulating on social media show people confronting police for being forced from their homes. These are not folks with COVID-19, but rather people whose apartments are being turned into government quarantine facilities to cope with the surging COVID cases. The rising tensions come as Chinese officials vow to send every positive case of COVID-19 and any close contact to government quarantine, no matter the age. Here you see an elderly man shuffling towards a group of other senior citizens, some in their 90s, most in wheelchairs, transferred from their nursing home to this isolation facility after testing positive. Video shared from inside another center shows elderly patients seemingly left unattended, cots set up in the halls with wooden boards and thin sheets as bedding. Since the start of this outbreak in early March, more than 400,000 cases have been reported in the city, according to China's National Health Commission. And most in this metropolis of more than 25 million people are still in strict lockdown. CNN's been living through it. We've mostly been sealed inside our homes, let out only for mandatory COVID tests and the occasional government distribution of groceries.
From chicken to potatoes.
Last week, we had a brief taste of freedom. I could step out of my apartment and walk all the way to the compound gate, still double locked. But since a reversal for our community, new restrictions have us sealed back inside our properties. The draconian and inconsistent policies, coupled with a constant uncertainty, weigh heavily. People tired, pushing back, physically, and through words. These banners appeared on the streets of Shanghai in the cover of night, this one calling residents to resist the limitless lockdown. This one reading, "People are dying," referring to the dire struggle to secure food and medical care. Online, a flood of frustration surfacing on China's heavily controlled internet. On Chinese social media platform Weibo, users began quoting the first sentence of China's national anthem. It reads, "Rise, those who don't want to be enslaved," a rally call no longer aimed at foreign oppressors, but rather Beijing's pandemic response and its harsh restrictions. That line now censored. Some residents even boldly calling out Chinese officials for a perceived hypocrisy. This person wearing the photo of one of China's foreign ministry spokespersons, who repeatedly accused Western government's COVID response of harming people's well-being. The sarcastic critique shared repeatedly online. The backlash likely to worsen as the weeks-long lockdown drags on, further damaging China's economic engine.
Implementing the strategy in an excessive manner by itself could lead to exactly what the zero COVID strategy wants to avoid.
The growing dissent calls into question China's zero COVID strategy at a critical time. Later this year, President Xi Jinping is expected to assume an almost unprecedented third term, paving the way for him to rule for life. But the highly anticipated coronation, now marred by discontent over a policy so closely tied to the people's leader.
There's a lot of skepticism and doubt over the official numbers when it comes to the case count and deaths, as there was in Wuhan. And similar to when we covered the initial outbreak more than 2 years ago, we rely heavily on anecdotal evidence. And for several weeks now, people have been sharing news on social media of loved ones dying from COVID right here in Shanghai. And yet for several weeks, the government kept the death count at 0. Now they've started to adjust those numbers, and that points to the delicate balance that Chinese officials are trying to strike. They want to show on one side their heavy measures are effective, but at the same time they need to demonstrate the virus is still serious and deadly. Otherwise, you'd have millions here asking, if it's not that serious, why this harsh lockdown? David Culver, CNN, Shanghai.
Important questions, as always. Now, straight ahead, the battle for Ukraine has lasted more than 2 months. Reconstruction will take years. We'll hear from an international financial institution doing all it can to provide support now and in the future. That's next. Welcome back. Scenes like these of utter destruction in Mariupol are a stark reminder of the massive aid Ukrainians will need to rebuild when and if Russian troops ultimately withdraw from their country. The future of Ukraine and the financial support it will need going forward are key topics of discussion at the World Bank and IMF meetings in Washington, D.C. this week. Delegates hearing today that the country might need some $5 billion a month just to keep the economy afloat. The European Bank for Reconstruction and Development is already offering Kyiv a relatively modest but also crucial $2 billion lifeline. It's a unique financial institution overseen by more than 70 countries whose goal is to promote economic growth, free markets and the spread of democracy in Central and Eastern Europe. Since its founding, it's invested over $150 billion on thousands of projects in the region, including reconstruction efforts in the area surrounding Ukraine's Chernobyl nuclear plant. The EBRD froze all assistance to Russia back in 2014 after its seizure of Crimea. Odile Renaud-Bassou is the bank's president and is joining us now from Washington, D.C. Odile, great to have you on the show. Thank you for your time. Correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is the EBRD is the only multilateral investment organization that has a mandate to use its investments to support democracy. In light of what we're seeing in Ukraine today, what does that mean to you for the bank's purpose?
Indeed, the EBRD has in its statute the objective to support countries that adhere to principle of democracy, multipartism, and so forth. And this has been a guiding principle in the activity of the bank. And that's why also, in line of consistently with this mandate, we are very actively supporting Ukraine at the current juncture. And in a symmetric manner, we have, as you mentioned, suspended all our financing access to our resources to Russia and Belarus in the context of the aggression on Ukraine.
Let's talk about the money that you've allocated, because you're calling it the Resilience and Livelihoods Package. It's 2 billion euros worth. It sounds like a lot of money, and I know you're also providing fast-track financing. How quickly can you allocate that money and get that money out, and what kind of projects are you looking for?
So what we are targeting is support to the economy, not support to the government, the budget of the government, but really the economy, which means the private sector, financing the trade, exchanges, import, export, financing the key infrastructure such as electricity network, railway network, gas, access to gas. And we already have a large pipeline of projects with clients we knew, because we've been working in Ukraine in the last 30 years. We are very important investors. We have been every year very important investors, investing around 1 billion per year in the last 3 years, for example. So we have a lot of clients, and we are in contact with them about to address their needs. For example, we had some project for investment in infrastructure, which we are repurposing now to provide liquidity, working capital, in a context where this public infrastructure, for example, cannot get payment or have difficulties to get payment from their clients. So our key focus is really supporting keeping the economy afloat and the key function of the economy working. And I mean, it takes a bit of time to implement the project and to disburse them, but we have, as I was saying, an important pipeline and really working very hard to react as quickly as possible to address the needs. Of course, the situation is also evolving on the ground, but I think that we are doing everything we can to be effective in supporting our clients.
I mean, I believe you have just shy of $5 billion portfolio in Ukraine now. And as you mentioned, some of this money is being reallocated for liquidity support, loan deferrals, debt forgiveness, trade finance as well. I just wonder if you have any sense at this stage, and I appreciate it's very difficult, how much of that portfolio is in distress, and how many of these people are coming to you and saying, look, either we need cash immediately and we need liquidity support, or we're not repaying any of those debts anytime soon?
We are seeing indeed clients in distress, and we are restructuring the debt with the private sector. We have up to now the level of default is relatively limited because you have some delay for payment, but we expect to have quite a high degree of losses and of clients unable to pay. So we will give forbearance as much as we can there also, in particular for the private sector.
I appreciate at the moment it's for many people it's about getting to safety and its survival. It's not worrying so much about repaying debts and things. But to your point, I know small and medium-sized enterprises is a crucial part of the support you present as well. Are you doing any assessment at this stage of infrastructure projects for rebuilding? Because as we were discussing earlier this week on the show, people are trying to go back, particularly to some of the Western cities, and there are and will be need very quickly for rebuilding and for infrastructure projects to begin. Are you beginning work on that too?
Yes, we have some team on the ground working on first, emergency support, humanitarian support, and so forth, but also assessing the need for reconstruction. I've seen the figures. I mean, there are a number of figures that are circulating around. I mean, from 50 billion need for in short-term reconstruction from the World Bank. Some figures are going much higher. It's of course very difficult to analyze, and it depends very much on the focus and, of course, evolution of the situation on the ground. But it's clear that there will be I mean, there are some key infrastructures which need new investment. Some of them have been destroyed. There is a lot also of investment needed in the housing. So I would say, from what I've seen, it's probably more than half of the 50 billion needs assessed as of today that would be in infrastructure, and the other part is more housing, buildings, and so forth. We see, for example, we've been working a lot on Chernobyl, for example, and invested a lot to put the safety framework in place, and in Chernobyl, and there we can already assess that there will be need for further investment in equipment and so forth because of deterioration of the situation.
There are those that look at potential future projects as well and say, also under your mandate is energy security. And to your point, and you mentioned nuclear power plants, helping with the financing perhaps of smaller, safe nuclear power plants, non-Russian oil and gas projects, even minerals. Obviously, Russia's not going to be supplying minerals, and investment in both Ukraine and surrounding countries to that effect, particularly as we transition away from carbon, could be great investments for the EBRD to focus on. Is that part of the game plan for this region going forward? Because I think in terms of energy security, this would be vital.
No, clearly there will be a need for very important investment in energy security and diversification of source of energy. Nuclear is likely to be part of the plan for a number of countries in the region, including Ukraine. We are not financing new nuclear plants. What we've been investing in and financing substantially is more the safety dimension. That's why we worked on Chernobyl. But what we are supporting very substantially with financing and with advisory activities is the development of renewable and the adjustment of the electricity network, the grid, for example, in order to be able to support a high level of renewable. And that will be very important in the agenda of reconstruction in Ukraine, but that's also a very important agenda in the neighboring countries. Some of them are very dependent on coal today, and they need to get out of coal and to develop alternative source of energy, and renewable and energy efficiency is also a very important area for investment for us.
Yeah, you and your team are going to be incredibly busy, I know, in the coming months and years. You mentioned and repeated actually that all investments, activities in Russia were frozen in 2014 after the invasion of Crimea. In light of what we've seen in Ukraine, is it time to divest of interests in Russia? Is that being discussed?
We started divesting in 2014. So we had at that point of time a portfolio of 10 billion in Russia, and now it's much lower, 10 times smaller. And indeed, the strategy is to divest. But we are managing that project by project, because what we have now in Russia is only equity investment, and we need to find buyers and so forth. But the direction is very clear, and it's to divestment.
So it's going to go down to zero as quickly as possible.
Exactly.
Odile, thank you for your time today. I know you and your team are incredibly busy, and we will let you get back to work. Odile Renaud-Bassé, they're the President of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Great to talk to you.
Thank you.
Right after the break. Thank you. After the break, I speak to the CEO of Metinvest, the company that owns the Azovstal steel plant, as President Putin gives an order to blockade it. Stay with us, that's next. Welcome back. Ukrainian fighters and civilians have been hunkered down in the Azovstal steel plant in Mariupol. As we reported earlier, President Putin says there is no need for his troops to storm the plant, but he's ordered a blockade so that, in his words, a fly could not get through. The plant's owners, Metinvest, which has facilities throughout Ukraine, once had around 40,000 employees in Mariupol. 4,300 of its workers at the Azovstal plant have escaped. Metinvest accounted for 45% of Ukraine's crude steel output last year. Now it's focused on getting aid and equipment to Ukrainian troops on the front lines. Yuri Ryzhenkov joins us now. He's the CEO of Metinvest Holding. Yuri, great to have you on the show. First and foremost, I'm sorry for what you and your workers and your family are going through. What can you tell us about the workers, the civilians that remain in this plant that's now surrounded by Russian troops?
Well, hello. First, when the war started, we have stocked quite a good stocks of food and water in the bomb shelters at the facilities at the plants. So for some period of time, the civilians, they were able to use it and basically survive on that. Unfortunately, all of the things they tend to run out, especially the food and daily necessities. So I think now it's close to a catastrophe there. But as far as I understand, both the fighters and civilians that are still there, they're not giving up.
No, a last stand as it's seemingly being called. Yuri, you mentioned something very important, and I know you were trying to get humanitarian aid into them. Do you have any sense of how supplies are now in the plant? How much food, how much water? I know electricity and communication is very difficult, but just in light of the Russian blockade, do you have any sense of how long they can survive in there?
Well, not really. As I said, we've stocked some food and water, but our assessment was that it's enough for 2-3 weeks. But they are now more than almost 8 weeks now in the blockade. So I have no idea what's this humanitarian situation there, but I'm sure it's a catastrophe. So we're trying to get as many of the people as possible out of town. We have volunteers helping us, basically driving small cars or buses back and forth, bringing people out so we can meet them on the either in a safety but on non-controlled territory or on controlled territory, provide them food and shelter and some daily necessities and get them some comfort. So that's what we've been focusing on the last few weeks.
You had 10,500 workers originally at this plant. I know, and I mentioned you've accounted for over 4,000 of them. What about the others?
Well, we've set up a hotline for our employees. Whoever comes out, they're registering on the hotline, and then we're providing them with the advice, depending on where they are. We're providing them with the advice of what to do, where to get the food, the shelter, the medical help, and so on. So far, as you rightly said, we had been contacted only by about 4,500 people from Azovstal. The remaining, they're still not in contact yet, but we're trying to spread the message around as much as possible to get them to contact us as soon as they're able to communicate. Hopefully they're still alive, hopefully they're okay, and hopefully they will get out and we will be able to provide them with all the necessary comfort.
Yeah, if people are watching, any of your workers are watching, I think that's such an important message. Get in touch and let people know that you're okay and can be accounted for. Of the people that remain stuck, the civilians and potential workers too, in that plant, President Putin has said that they will be treated in a dignified manner if they surrender. I know it's a terrible question to have to answer, but what's your advice if they see this, if somehow they get connection and can see this? Do you advise them to surrender?
Well, our employees, the civilians, they're not fighting, so they cannot surrender because they are not fighting. But my advice to them is try to get out and try to get to either sort of Azov Sea coast where we can take care of them to the west, or all the way to Zaporizhia where we can meet them and take care of them. So I don't see how civilians can surrender, but rather my advice to them is to get out. if you can, if it's possible.
And what about the troops? Because this has become, as we've discussed, what feels to be the last stand in Mariupol. How do you as a Ukrainian feel about the stance of these troops?
Well, to be honest, we all feel very proud for our fighters. So, I mean, war is war, but what they are showing is a true heroism there, and of course it's their decision what to do next. We cannot advise them, but we would be proud of them anyway. They're heroes anyway.
The other question, I think, and it could become a very important one. I know you've said in the past this facility, and it's a big one, we're talking more than 4 square miles, will not be used by Russia. The workers won't work for them. Again, if the Russians do end up taking this plant and take control overall in Mariupol, are you willing to see that facility used for Russian purposes? I know at the moment you've been providing support to Ukrainian troops.
Well, we already said our shareholder and the company, it's our shareholders and the company itself has proclaimed that we will not work under the Russian occupation. Our enterprises will not be working under Russian occupation. We will not be controlling this work. We will not be providing this work. Of course, Russians can try to restart the plants. Well, let's see if they can manage that. I doubt very much. But to be honest, I still believe that Ukraine will be able to take back Mariupol, and we will be restoring those plants, and they will be working in Ukraine.
Yuri, forgive me for asking, but if you're given an ultimatum, and it comes down to life or death for your workers, would you advise them to work if they're told to?
Well, I think if it's a life or death situation, they won't really have much choice, and they will have to work. But what I'm saying is that I doubt very much that the Russians will be able to restore the operations at those mills to significant capacity just by what they're having. So I'm saying it's technically, for them, it's technically and market-wise, it's going to be very difficult. That's why I believe they will be able to operate those facilities. Our workers, well, whoever stays there, if it saves their life, yes, they will work. But my advice to them, get out, get to Ukraine-controlled territory, get in touch with us as soon as possible.
Yeah, let people know where you are and that you're safe. Let's talk about the rebuild. I mentioned how important your operations are for steel exports and internally for the country, and a lot of work's going to be needed to rebuild. Talk about the role that you see for Metinvest in that. Well,
first is the city of Mariupol. There is a lot of damage to the civil infrastructure. So definitely Metinvest will participate with helping people to restore their houses, to restore the infrastructure there in the city and help the city to restore its operation. Second, the steel mills, since we stopped them in an orderly manner to avoid any technological disaster, I believe we can still rebuild them. And the rebuild will be in both ways. On one hand, we will try to restore the existing technology, but in parallel, we will be building the new technology, which we envisaged anyway and announced a few months ago, that we were planning to do to decarbonize the new green steel production in Mariupol. That is still the plan, and we still believe we can do that, and we still believe we will do it in Mariupol, in Ukraine.
Yes, we like the attitude. Yuri, I know you have children abroad that were studying when this war began, so you're separated from them, and you're just one family of many who's now separated. Families in surrounding countries, the men folk staying behind to fight or to carry on work as best they can. What's your message to your children and to those families that are separated?
Well, the message is simple. We're here to win. The victory will come for Ukraine, and then the families will be reunited. So the simple message, just hang on. We're doing it. We will succeed.
Yeah, we'll see you soon. Yuri, Stay safe, please. Thank you for your time, and we'll chat again soon. The CEO of Met Invest there. Thank you, Yuri. We're back after this. Any moment now, we expect US President Joe Biden to announce more security assistance to Ukraine. And we've just learned, actually, Ukraine's Prime Minister is there at the White House too ahead of this announcement. We will bring you President Biden's remarks the moment we happen. For now, let me bring you up to speed with some of the other stories making headlines around the world. More clashes earlier Thursday between Palestinians and Israeli security forces around the entrance to the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem. Videos show Palestinians inside the building launching fireworks towards police and police firing stun grenades. Friction between Israeli nationalists and Palestinians has led to clashes recently around the mosque compound. French President Emmanuel Macron and his election rival Marine Le Pen squared off in a televised debate Wednesday night ahead of Sunday's runoff election. Macron attacked Le Pen for her ties to Russian banks and Vladimir Putin, while Le Pen said Macron did not care about working-class France, especially healthcare workers. CNN's senior international correspondent Jim Bitterman has more from Paris. The only head-to-head, Jim, I believe, welcome before the public vote, and perhaps no surprise as far as Emmanuel Macron was concerned, the gloves were well and truly off, and Marine Le Pen's ties to Russia a highlight or a low light, depending on how you choose to look at it.
Exactly. It was the closest thing there was in the debate, 2 hours and 45 minutes long, to a gotcha moment. And it came as Emmanuel Macron accused Marine Le Pen of being beholden to the Russians because of a $10 million loan her party took from a Russian bank some years ago. Here's the way the exchange went.
You depend on Russian power. You depend on Mr. Putin. A few months after saying that, Madame Le Pen, you took out a loan from a Russian bank in 2015, First Czech Russian Bank. When you talk about Russia, you're not talking to other world leaders. You are talking to your banker. That is the problem, Madame Le Pen. We see it. When there are brave and difficult stands to take, neither you nor your representatives are there.
He knows very well that I am a completely free and independent woman. I defend France and the French because I'm a patriot, and I've shown that all my life.
There were some fiery moments, Julia, no question about it. But in the end, at least if you believe the opinion polls, the snap polls taken right after the debate aired last night, they may not have changed the battle lines very much. The opinion polls indicated that the viewers who watched the entire debate believed that Emmanuel Macron was more convincing than his rival, and by a somewhat great margin. It was 59 to 39 from Macron over Marine Le Pen. So, it may not have changed things. We'll see what the voters get to the polls on Sunday, Julia.
It's a far wider margin than the polls suggest, at least, coming out of that debate. She did catch my attention, though, on a few things where she talked about, and forgive the translation, France needing to be stitched back together and how she would be the leader to address the high cost of living and surging energy prices. And it's a sore point not just for France, but for many other nations too. Jim, do you think Emmanuel Macron takes it in the end in the vote this weekend?
Well, that's the way it looks, at least from the opinion polls. By the way, on that issue of stitching the country back together, she did come out on top on that snap poll in terms of who's the best to, renew ties amongst the French. They're basically a very divided country right now, and the pollsters found indication that she's probably going to be better at it than Mr. Macron. But that was one of the few areas that she came out on top. Julia?
Yeah. The candidate that voters need to go to if they're unable to make ends meet. I think that was her message, and it certainly caught my attention. Jim, we shall see. Great to have you with us. Thank you. Jim Bitterman in Paris there.
Yep.
Now coming up, earnings fit for a celebratory tweet or perhaps a Tesla victory tango. Elon Musk might just break out the moves again after blockbuster results. We'll see next. Once again, a reminder that any moment now we expect US President Joe Biden to announce more security assistance to Ukraine. He's just met Ukraine's Prime Minister at the White House ahead of this announcement. We understand that Denis Shmyhal has just left and was there for around 45 minutes. We will bring you President Biden's remarks the moment they begin. For For now, let's take a look at what's going on in the market price action. And it was a Netflix nightmare on Wednesday. Well, today, a Tesla triumph. Tesla shares rooming ahead in early trade after the electric car maker reported record quarterly profits of more than $3 billion for the first quarter. China COVID lockdowns not enough to slow the company down either. Tesla's results helping drive a bit of bullish action on Wall Street too. Take a look at that for the majors. All averages are higher after the turbulence that came from Wednesday's streaming surprise from Netflix. The shares falling again today amid news that billionaire investor Bill Ackman has sold his entire $1.1 billion stake after Netflix gave a warning on subscription growth. That translates into a $400 million loss. Ackman angst and Musk merriment. Anna Stewart joins me now. Ooh, that was a challenge. Get my teeth back in, Anna. Tesla reporting first quarter net earnings that were 7 times greater, I believe, than a year ago. Some of that, of course, price hikes in the face of supply chain kinks. But given what they're battling more broadly, this is an impressive performance, an electrifying, let's call it that, result.
Nice, Julia, electrifying. Yeah, this was an incredible beat. And you know what, Tesla does keep surprising, I think, on some of these reports, because this is despite some big challenges, looking at factory shutdowns in China as a result of lockdowns, looking at inflation, pushing up the cost of raw materials, and yet such a big beat. Demand is strong. Perhaps not surprising given rising fuel costs across the world, frankly, but also a chart which we have not been able to get for you, I believe, but looking at Tesla orders post-Super Bowl, because this was a wonderful chart in the earnings report that just shows how smug Tesla and Elon Musk are, because despite spending absolutely nothing on ad space, they saw huge demand rise off the back of other car makers' ads during the Super Bowl. And in terms of the outlook, some highlights to mention. Elon Musk thinks they can produce 60% more cars this year compared to last, and a big update on robo-taxis. Listen to this, very ambitious. Expecting to mass produce robo-taxis by 2024. That is just a year and a half away. And that goes to show, I think, some of the struggle with Wall Street and analysts estimating where this company will go. Because do you believe that incredible ambition to mass produce robo-taxis by 2024? What price would you put on that? They keep beating, maybe they'll make it. Julia?
Yeah, I mean, as he said on the call as well, we remain production constrained, not demand constrained. Will that still be the case in light of the challenges that China faces with the gig factory there as well? And of course, pricing pressures, because I know some of their long-term supply contracts are rolling off. So that's going to be key to watch too. What it does unlock, though, Anna, is a multi-billion-dollar paycheck, I believe, for Elon Musk. Not quite enough to buy Twitter, but approaching it. What's the latest on that?
Yeah, it unlocks the latest tranche, or the last tranche, of the incredible deal that they reached in 2018 in terms of bonuses of $23 billion. Of course, we won't actually be able to sell any of those shares for a few years. Where we are with Twitter is it's all gone a bit quiet. Now, media reports do suggest that Elon Musk is looking to raise some debt. It's expected that private equity would be involved in any case as well. They will have to mull over not just having a maverick like Elon Musk behind the steering wheel of Twitter, but also, of course, the sort of future finances and the potential for Twitter, which isn't looking nearly as rosy, I have to say, as Tesla. No news from Twitter on this bid. Now, given that poison pill measure they introduced last week, I'd say it's not looking good. Also, looking at the share price, currently around $46 a share, far less than what Elon Musk was bidding for. Remember, $52.40.
Yes. Wow. Anna Stewart, we shall watch this space. I think the phrase for that is show me the money. Thank you for that. OK, before we go, many happy returns to Queen Elizabeth as she celebrates her 96th birthday. And she's getting her own Barbie doll, well, from Mattel. Mattel says it's a tribute to the Queen's historic 70 years on the throne. Wow, piercing blue eyes. That is a beautiful doll. Now, the royal family and the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson also honouring her on Twitter, calling her an inspiration to people all around the world.
Millions of people cherish a particular moment of your reign, and for me, it has to be the opening ceremony of the London Olympics in 2012, when Your Majesty arrived, at least figuratively, by jumping from a helicopter escorted by James Bond, and then the trumpet sounded, and Your Majesty made your entrance, and the entire stadium rose as one and burst into applause.
And just released this new photo of the Queen and her beloved ponies taken last month. Definitely prefer the ponies to the Barbie doll. That's it for the show. Stay with CNN. Connect the World with Becky Anderson is next as we await President Biden, of course, from the White House. Stay with CNN.
Well, this hour, the huge steel factory housing Ukrainian soldiers and families in Mariupol is still standing. Russia's president says there's no need to storm it. Instead, he is ordering Russian troops to blockade it so that, quote, a fly cannot get through. Putin making those comments while claiming victory for what he calls the liberation of Mariupol. Well, getting people safely out of that besieged southern port city in Ukraine remains problematic. The mayor of Mariupol saying last hour that expected evacuation buses had not arrived. 4 buses did manage to leave on Wednesday, far fewer than hoped. The Ukrainian Deputy Prime Minister calling the security situation there, difficult. 2 senior Ukrainian negotiators say they are prepared to meet their Russian counterparts in Mariupol to negotiate safe passage out of the city for civilians and troops. Let me get you to the White House now, where Joe Biden is now set to address the nation on the security situation in Ukraine.
Others. And we had a good discussion. I've talked about what I'm about to tell you about today, as well as he was thanking the American people for their support, understands it's significant, and we talked about keeping everyone together in terms of Europe, the European Union, and others in the effort to stop Putin's brutality. But before I head out to the West Coast, I want to quickly update the American people on the latest steps we're taking to support the people of Ukraine and to hold Putin accountable for his brutal and bloody war. Russian forces have retreated from Kyiv, leaving behind them a horrifying evidence, and you've seen it, you reported it, your folks. And by the way, I don't say this often, but I think we should give enormous credit to the folks with your agencies that are on the ground in Ukraine, in these spots, and they're really, I've spoken to several of them. We owe them. But uncovering these evidences of their atrocities and war crimes against Ukrainian people is so clear to the whole world now. Now they've launched and refocused their campaign to seize new territory in eastern Ukraine. And we're in a critical window now of time where they're going to set the stage for the next phase of this war. And the United States and our allies and partners are moving as fast as possible to continue to provide Ukraine the forces that they need, the weapons they need, the equipment they need, their forces need to defend their nation. Last week, I signed an $800 million package of security assistance to Ukraine that included new capabilities like artillery systems and armored personnel carriers, equipment that is responsive to Ukraine's needs and tailored to support the intensified fighting in the Donbas region, which is a different war than in other places because both topographically it's different. It's flat, it's not in the mountains, and it requires different kinds of weapons to be more effective. Today, I'm announcing another $800 million to further augment Ukraine's ability to fight in the east, in the Donbas region. This package includes heavy artillery weapons, dozens of howitzers, and 144,000 rounds of ammunition to go with those howitzers. It also includes more tactical drones. In the past 2 months, we've moved weapons and equipment to Ukraine at record speed. We've sent thousands of anti-armor and anti-missile helicopters, drones, grenade launchers, machine guns, rifles, radar systems. More than 50 million rounds of ammunition had already been sent. The United States alone has provided 10 anti-armor systems for every 1 Russian tank that's in Ukraine, a 10-to-1 ratio. We're sharing and will continue to share significant timely intelligence with Ukraine to help defend them against Russian aggression. And on top of this, these direct contributions from the United States, we're the outfit facilitating the significant flow of weapons and systems to Ukraine from other allies and partners around the world, like the S-300 long-range anti-aircraft systems that Slovakia recently transferred to Ukraine. We are getting them in there. We won't always be able to advertise everything that our partners are doing to support Ukraine and its fight for freedom, but to modernize Teddy Roosevelt's famous advice, sometimes we will speak softly and carry a large javelin, because we're sending a lot of those in as well. You know, but we're not sitting on the funding that Congress has provided for Ukraine. We're sending it directly to the front lines of freedom, to the fearless and skilled Ukrainian fighters who are standing in the breach. You got to admit, must be amazed at the courage of this country, the resolve that they're showing, not just their military, but the average citizen, men and women, young men, young women as well. It's, you know, the sustained and coordinated support of the international community, led and facilitated by the United States, is a significant reason why Ukraine is able to stop Russia from taking over their country thus far. Every American taxpayer, Every member of our armed forces can be proud of the fact that our country's generosity and the skill and service of our military helped arm and repel Russia's aggression in Ukraine, to beat back Putin's savagery that tried to seize Ukraine's capital and wipe out Ukraine's government. The Battle of Kyiv was a historic victory for the Ukrainians. It was a victory for freedom, won by the Ukrainian people with unprecedented assistance by the United States and our allies and our partners. Now we have to accelerate that assistance package to help prepare Ukraine for Russia's offensive that's going to be more limited in terms of geography, but not in terms of brutality. Not in terms of brutality. Combined with our recent drawdowns, it will ensure a steady flow of weapons and equipment into Ukraine over the next few weeks. However, with this latest disbursement, I've almost exhausted the drawdown authority I have that Congress authorized for Ukraine in a bipartisan spending bill last month. In order to sustain Ukraine for the duration of this fight, next week I'm going to have to be sending to Congress a supplemental budget request to keep weapons and ammunition flowing without interruption to the brave Ukrainian fighters and continue to deliver economic assistance to the Ukrainian people. My hope is, and my expectation is, Congress would move and act quickly. And I want to thank the Congress, Democrats and Republicans, for their support for the people of Ukraine. Our unity at home, our unity with our allies and partners, and our unity with the Ukrainian people is sending an unmistakable message to Putin. He will never succeed in dominating and occupying all of Ukraine. That will not happen. In addition to bolstering Ukraine's resistance on the battlefield, we're also demonstrating our support for the people of Ukraine. Today, the United States is announcing that we intend to provide an additional $500 million in direct economic assistance to the Ukrainian government. This brings our total economic support for Ukraine to $1 billion in the past 2 months. This is money the government can help use to stabilize their economy, to support communities that have been devastated by the Russian onslaught, and pay the brave workers that continue to provide essential services to the people of Ukraine. You know, these past weeks have seen a terrible human cost of Putin's ambition for conquest and control. Approximately two-thirds of all Ukrainian children have been displaced from their home. More than 5 million Ukrainians have fled their country. It's an absolute outrage. The idea this is happening, approaching the second quarter of the 21st century, is just, Last month when I was in Europe, I announced that the United States would welcome 100,000 Ukrainians so that we share in the responsibility of supporting Ukrainians fleeing Putin's war machine. We've already welcomed tens of thousands of Ukrainians to the United States, and today I'm announcing a program, Unite for Ukraine, a new program to enable Ukrainians seeking refuge to come directly from Europe to the United States. This new humanitarian parole program will complement the existing legal pathways available to Ukrainians, including immigrant visas and refugees processing. It will provide an expedient channel for secure legal migration from Europe to the United States for Ukrainians who have a U.S. sponsor, such as a family or an NGO. This program will be fast, it will be streamlined, and will ensure the United States honors its commitment to go to the people of Ukraine and need not go through our southern border. We're also continuing to ratchet up the pressure on Putin and further isolate Russia on the world stage. Yesterday, the Treasury Department rolled out additional measures to crack down on the entities and individuals attempting to evade our unprecedented sanctions, not just ours, but throughout the West. Today, I'm announcing that the United States will ban Russian-affiliated ships from our ports, as they did in Europe. That means no ship that sails under the Russian flag or that is owned or operated by a Russian interest will be allowed to dock in a United States port or access our shores. None. This is yet another critical step we're taking in concert with our partners in the European Union, the United Kingdom, Canada, and further to deny Russia the benefits of international economic system that they so enjoyed in the past. We don't know how long this war will last, but as we approach the 2-month mark, here's what we do know. Putin has failed to achieve his grand ambitions on the battlefield. After weeks of shelling Kyiv, Kyiv still stands. President Zelensky and his democratically elected government still remain in power. and the Ukrainian armed forces, joined by many brave Ukrainian civilians, have thwarted Russia's conquest of their country. They've been bolstered from day one by an unstinting supply of weapons, ammunition, armor, intelligence from the nations of the free world, led by us, the United States. As Russia continues to grind out the military advances and their military advances and the brutalities against Ukraine, Putin is banking on us losing interest. That's been my view. You heard me say this from the beginning. He was counting on NATO, European Union, our allies in Asia, cracking, moving away. He's betting on Western unity will crack. He's still betting on that. And once again, we're going to prove him wrong. We will not lessen our resolve. We're going to continue to stand with the brave and proud people of Ukraine. We will never fail in our determination to defend freedom and oppose tyranny. It's as simple as that. So again, I want to thank the American people. Thank the American people for their support of the Ukrainian people. This is our responsibility, it seems to me, and we've been able to hold the whole world together in this effort. So thank you very much. Thank you. I'm going to take just one or two questions. I got a plane to catch.
What does Putin claiming control over Mariupol mean? How significant is that?
Well, first of all, it's questionable whether he does control Mariupol. One thing for sure we know about Mariupol, he should allow humanitarian corridors to let people on that steel mill and other places that are buried under rubble to get out, That's what any head of state would do in such a circumstance. And so there is no evidence yet that Mariupol is completely fallen.
Mr. President, on Title 42, sir, are you considering delaying lifting Title 42?
No, what I'm considering is continuing to hear from well, first of all, there's going to be an appeal by the Justice Department, because as a matter of principle, we want to be able to be in a position where if in fact it is strongly concluded by the scientists that we need Title 42, that we be able to do that. But there has been no decision on extending Title 42. Thank you.
Mr. President, how long can the U.S. maintain the level and pace of this military support for Ukraine?
Well, we have the capacity to do this for a long time. The question is, are we going to continue to maintain the support of the international community and keep the pressure on Putin to prevent him from overrunning the country, number one, and number two, make sure we continue to maintain the economic sanctions, which over time, and we're beginning to see it, are devastating their economy and their ability to move forward. So the most important thing right now is maintain the unity. So far, so good. Thank you very much.
How much money are you going to ask for in the supplemental? How much money in the supplemental?
The answer that's being decided now. I'm asking the Defense Department to put together a business agreement. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, US President Joe Biden speaking to the nation from the Roosevelt Room at the White House today, announcing another $800 million in aid to Ukraine, including heavy artillery, dozens of howitzers and ammunition to go with them. He talked about the delivery of tactical drones, and he said we are helping to facilitate the transfer of weaponry from other allies as well. Sometimes, he said, we will speak softly and carry a large javelin, he said, to steal a phrase from President Roosevelt. And he applauded the courage and resolve shown by Ukrainians, and he said every American taxpayer can be proud of the fact that they are involved in helping Ukraine defend against Russia's offensive. Putin, he said, has launched and refocused the campaign to seize new territory. This phase, the US president said, is a new phase, more limited in terms of geography, but not in terms of atrocities. How long does this war go on? He was asked as he was leaving the room. He said, it'll go on as long as we can maintain the unity of the international community. Well, Matt Rivers connecting us in Lviv in western Ukraine, and Kylie Atwood is at the State Department with more on that announcement by Joe Biden. Shashank Joshi is in the London studio with me. He's defence editor at The Economist. Where do you want to start? Let's start with you. It's good to have you here, and I'll come to my two colleagues. What did you make of what you just heard?
I think it's very important. You know, we're waking up every 2 days now to a new announcement of an $800 million package, almost weekly. Who would have thought this would have been the case 2 weeks ago when we thought Kiev might fall in days? We are seeing, Becky, what I think is probably the single most significant, substantial transfer of weaponry to a single state in such a short period of time since the Second World War. And what I just heard was a commitment by President Biden that Ukraine's not going to be allowed to lose. Russia is going up against the defense industrial capacity of the United States and of Europe. This is a country with a GDP that isn't that much bigger than Spain, than Italy. That looks to me like a losing battle for Russia.
Let's get to the State Department. Kylie Atwood, anything in that announcement that we didn't already know? There's certainly a ratcheting up in the quality of the weaponry, given that this is a new phase, this is a different phase, and will need different weapons to fight Russia's army.
Yeah, that's right. He also described exactly why the Biden administration continues to give this security assistance right now, very clearly saying that this war is at a critical moment because this moment in time is going to define what the next stage of the war looks like. So really explaining to folks why we saw this $800 million in security assistance, in military assistance to Ukraine last week. And then there's this second package echoing that, mirroring that this week. As you said, heavy artillery, part of that package, more than 100,000 rounds of ammunition, part of that package. So the Biden administration is doubling down on what it did last week. There isn't anything new this week, but they are providing more of what Ukraine is saying that it needs at this moment in this fight. It's also significant that President Biden announced that his administration has now come up with a new form of immigration for the Ukrainians coming from Europe to the United States that will expedite the process for them to get here. That is significant because his administration has committed to admitting 100,000 Ukrainians, but we haven't really seen a system in place that can back up that commitment. So, of course, we will look for more details on that, but it does mean that the Biden administration is trying to get those Ukrainians to come to the United States who have sponsors here in the United States, perhaps family members, a little bit more quickly. And lastly, I do want to point out that the president said, what the president said about Mariupol, saying there is no evidence yet that it has completely fallen. Of course, that is a key statement because Russia is claiming in the last few hours here that they have taken Mariupol, that they're letting out the rest of the folks here. The president doubling down on the Ukrainian side, saying that that fight isn't completely over.
Well, Matt, you've been talking to your sources and reporting on what is going on in Mariupol. Let's be quite clear, CNN isn't on the ground there. We are not inside the city, so we are having to rely on narratives coming out of there and video coming out of there. Getting people to safety, though, remains absolutely key in what is this besieged southern port city at this point. What do we know?
Well, we know it's going incredibly poorly, Becky, and that is the tragedy because there are some 120,000 citizens, ordinary people in and around Mariupol, including inside that steel plant where the bulk of the Ukrainian resistance remains, that needs evacuation. Yesterday, 4 buses, just 4 buses carrying a few dozen people managed to be evacuated. And today, even though allegedly that humanitarian corridor is still open, and we're still trying to get some information about this, but buses have had trouble reaching the city. And there was only about 200 people or so, according to the city's mayor, that were lined up. So 200 out of 120,000. So that gives you an idea of just how dire the situation is when it comes to evacuations. Why aren't more people trying to take advantage of this? We have no way to know for sure, but there's a number of different reasons. Number one, why exactly would you trust the Russian military that they're going to respect a ceasefire and not fire on buses or civilians when they've showed wanton disregard for civilian life? That's one reason, potentially. The other reason, we can't get in touch with people in Mariupol because there's a lack of communications infrastructure. that means that people within Mariupol have trouble getting access to information. So just because the mayor is on Telegram saying you should leave the city, it doesn't mean that people who are inside these bombed out apartment buildings have even heard that an evacuation is going on. So there's a number of different things that could be going on there, Becky, but the end result is the same. Evacuations going incredibly poorly in Mariupol.
Matt, Kylie, and Shashank, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Well, since Russia invaded Ukraine, the small country of Estonia has made a big impact with its support for Ukraine. Estonia shares a border with Russia, and although it has a large Russian-speaking population, this NATO member is concerned about Russian aggression. Russia has just announced it's closing the Estonian, Latvian and Lithuanian consulates in St. Petersburg in retaliation for their military assistance to Ukraine. Well, last week, the Estonian President, Ala Karas, met with the Ukrainian President, Volodymyr Zelensky, alongside leaders from the other Baltic countries and Poland. Earlier, I spoke with Mr. Karas about what he learned on the ground.
It was a meeting with three presidents from Baltic states and Poland, and we visited President Zelensky. The feeling was, he's a very brave man, of course, and he's very enthusiastic at the moment, though, to end this war, because I also visited President right before war. He was more worried because there was uncertainty and he didn't know what happens. But now the war is going on and he knows exactly what to do, and he's looking for more help from our countries and from different countries, like including US.
Yeah. So can you be a little bit more specific about what you discussed?
Well, first of all, the discussion started with ban of oil and gas, and the President Zelensky told us that it's at utmost important that we should ban supplying this gas and oil from Russia. And the second topic was about the grain, which is now they have in Ukraine, and we all know that Ukraine supplies grain and sunflower to different countries, including Africa. And there are more than 20 million tons of grain in the storages at the moment, and they have difficulties to get them out. That means there is a kind of sense of humanitarian problem in future if you can't provide grain to different countries. And there's probably 50 million tons coming from this year's harvest. And one proposal was that we could open our ports in Baltics and in Poland and use trains to provide grain to different countries. And of course, another option is to try to keep Port of Odessa open, that we could provide this kind of humanitarian aid to countries.
So as I understand it, there were a number of issues discussed, not least Russian energy, the issue with grain, and what needs to happen next as far as military hardware is concerned for the Ukrainians. And you talked about opening ports from your countries, which would allow Ukraine to transport grain out by rail. Can you expand on that?
This was a new idea, and we took it in, and we are going to discuss in our countries. It's mostly concerns Lithuania, Latvia, and Poland. Not much Estonia, because we are far north. But these countries will discuss and give a solution to President Zelensky. And of course, one discussion we had was how to rebuild Ukraine, because many buildings are bombed down, and they also need not only military help, but also cranes and different machinery to build up, to restore the houses. And we also asked for a list what kind of help they actually need.
How long do you believe this war will go on?
Well, it's difficult to say. It's worst what can happen, that this war will keep frozen. That means it's going on and on and on. So that's why it's important to end it as soon as possible. and all the sanctions, including gas and oil, are utmost important. Otherwise, we just kind of watch, and Ukrainians are dying and fighting for actually for free Europe and for Western world and so forth.
You also visited surrounding towns around Kyiv. Can you just describe what you saw there?
It's just horrible. As I said once, I was speechless. I mean, killing civilians, children, raping women, and you see the results out there. Buildings are bombed down, and all this violence. It's a war crime. It's a crime against humanity, and there are already people from International Crime Court in place, and we also provide juridical support to Ukrainians. So this crime should be documented, and there should be a trial.
Is it genocide?
There are elements of genocide, definitely, and our parliament also discussing this matter today and tomorrow.
Throughout this war, we've seen small European countries like your own leading the way to some extent when it comes to supporting Ukraine, particularly with weapons. Do you believe that the larger countries with stronger economies, such as Germany, for example, should be doing more at this point?
They started doing more, and also US is providing now military and sophisticated military assistance. So it takes time probably for bigger countries, and we have experience already from past. We do remember how it was in 20th centuries, before the Second World War and after the Second World War. So we have this kind of experience, and it's not only a question of Baltic state or small state. It's a question of Europe and security of Europe, which has dramatically changed during the past 2 months.
The US State Department yesterday suggesting that NATO allies could actually be on the ground going forward and help in evacuation corridors. We specifically talking to the issue of Mariupol, where so many tens of thousands of people still remain and still are in a desperate state. What do you know about the detail of any plans for NATO allies to be active on the ground in Ukraine?
Well, so obviously, we don't want to actively be involved in this war, but with military assistance and also this corridor you mentioned, it's a matter of discussions. We shouldn't avoid these kind of discussions, and to end up with a result or some kind of alternatives. So this is a democracy. I mean, we should discuss this openly to end this war as soon as possible.
So do you expect to see NATO boots on the ground helping with evacuation?
It's very difficult to predict, but different NATO countries provide assistance already. So it's and as Kremlin said, it's war against NATO, it's war against free world, it's war against West. So we are involved anyway.
But there haven't been any boots on the ground, and there haven't been any jets in the air. I mean, let's be quite clear about this. To date, do you believe that may change?
It depends what Putin's next steps are. If he's start to use chemical weapons or anything worse, of course, we should be on ground.
Estonia is a country of, what, 1.3 million people. It's taken in 30,000 Ukrainian refugees since the war began. What impact is this having on your country, your population, and how many more people could you take in?
We don't have this limit at the moment. Of course, some people are getting worried that there are too many Ukrainians coming to our country. But we decided to open our hearts and doors for Ukrainians. And we are trying to do their best to accommodate them, to shelter, to give education in Estonian schools, in Estonian language, and so forth. And most of them are women and children, and trying to find job also for parents and mothers. And they are also extremely educated, at least some of them, teachers, medical doctors, nurses, and so forth. And it's important to use them at schools and at hospitals.
Well, that was the view from the Estonian president, Alar Karis, speaking to me a little earlier. And next hour, I'll speak to the foreign minister of another small European country, the Czech Republic, which is also pulling more than its weight in supporting Ukraine. We will be back straight after this short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. I'm Becky Anderson in London. You're watching Connect the World, where it is 3:30 here for you in London. France's president going head-to-head with the far-right candidate challenging him for the presidency. Voters watched as Emmanuel Macron and Marine Le Pen debated for nearly 3 hours last night, the conversation spanning from France's relations with Russia to addressing the rising cost of living. The country is just 3 days off from a runoff. The first vote on April the 10th saw 12 candidates. But since neither Emmanuel Macron or Marine Le Pen got more than 50% of the vote, they are going into a runoff. Our Paris correspondent Melissa Bell joins me now live, having listened in to the 3 hours. What was the response of the French public? Who won out last night, Melissa?
Well, as France watched it, or at least the 15.5 million people who took the time to watch it, Becky did, there was no real knockout blow as we'd seen back in 2017 when they'd gone head-to-head. And yet, a poll conducted by our affiliate BFM shows that in the end, 59% of those who watched believe that President Macron came off as more presidential. And after all, this is the point of that debate. This was the only one that Macron took part in. And it was important for Marine Le Pen that this time she could make herself heard in a way that she hadn't 5 years ago. Have a listen to what was her main and most successful line of attack on the cost of living, in which she alleges are Macron's failures to have addressed it.
I must here again be the spokesperson of the French people, because Mr. Macron, I heard you. With your government, you are delighted to have increased French people's purchasing power. But me, I only saw French people who told me about their problems with purchasing power. I only saw French people who told me that they can't make it anymore. They can't get by. They can't make ends meet at the end of the month.
The far-right candidate has really made that, the cost of living, rising inflation, rising energy costs, central to her campaign. Becky, you'll remember that Macron's first term was marked by yellow vest protests, discontent over pension reform, discontent also over lockdowns and the way he managed the COVID-19 crisis. That's what she was hoping to tap into, but Emmanuel Macron is pretty good in this format, pretty unbeatable, and it was on Russia, really, that she was shakiest of all, and where Emmanuel Macron really laid in. Those ties that she has to the Kremlin, her long-standing support for more dialogue with Moscow, and her long-standing opposition to sanctions, even though that has now softened, Becky, as a result of the war.
Yeah, because in the past, of course, Marine Le Pen has voiced admiration for the Russian President, Vladimir Putin. Mr. Macron, as you say, seizing on that. What did he say specifically, and how did she respond, out of interest?
Well, it was unfortunate for her that just a few hours before the debate, the Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny had tweeted from his jail, urging the French to back Macron, and going into the details of that 2014 loan that her party took out from a Russian bank. She has always claimed it was a legitimate loan that she took out simply because no French bank would lend to her party. What Navalny put in his long thread in remarkable French was that this was a bank well known to have ties to the Kremlin, that it would have been some kind of exchange for political influence, and that it was a corrupt bank, and that Marine Le Pen must have known that, urging the French to go out and vote for Macron. Macron, therefore, when the debate began, or the part of it on Russia, really went for her on the loan, suggesting that it meant that she couldn't have any real independence on so many of the issues that matter even more today, Becky.
Melissa Bell is in Paris. Thank you, Melissa. Join us Sunday, 8 p.m. Paris time, 2 p.m. Eastern, for our special live coverage of the French elections right here on CNN. Well, Boris Johnson is in deal-making mode. The British Prime Minister is in India as we speak on a post-Brexit trade mission. As the so-called Partygate scandal simmers back home, Downing Street says Mr. Johnson is expected to announce deals with India worth more than $1 billion. At the same time, he's playing down the prospect of getting India's Prime Minister to take a tougher stance against Russia over Ukraine. India, of course, has abstained from various UN resolutions condemning the invasion. Well, as Boris Johnson shakes hands in India, the Metropolitan Police in London confirms it won't make any more Partygate fines public until after key elections next month in England. This announcement comes as UK lawmakers debate whether to move ahead with a probe which would look into claims the Prime Minister misled Parliament over lockdown parties. A vote on that is expected in the coming hours. Earlier in the day, there was a surprise U-turn by the government when it dropped a bid to delay that vote. Right, still ahead, the race for the Premier League title is well alive, and it is well. And Manchester City with no plans to slow down, it seems. Details are in our sports update after this. Well, Britain's Coldstream Guards there performing Happy Birthday for a very special lady. They are marking Queen Elizabeth II's 96th birthday. Gun salutes rang out across London today to honour the UK's longest reigning monarch, who is celebrating 70 years on the throne this year. But the commemorations didn't stop there. On Wednesday, this photo of the Queen with her fell ponies was released to mark the special occasion. And for Her Majesty's Platinum Jubilee, the release of her very own Barbie doll. Who would have known? I've got Amanda Davis with me in the house to talk sport. That was a very sweet reaction from you.
That's what everyone aspires to in life, no? Your own Barbie doll. You know you've made it when you've got your own Barbie doll.
And it took until her 96th birthday to make it, but good for her. No, that's lovely. It's tough at the top. We're going to talk football, of course. Man City have no plans to be elsewhere, though, than at the top of the Premier League. What's going on?
Yeah, we shouldn't be surprised, should we? People saying it was advantage Liverpool after 2 nights ago, over to Manchester City. Could they beat Brighton to go back on top? And, of course, they did, in pretty emphatic style, 3-0. And, you know, Pep Guardiola admitted afterwards his side can't slip up. They are still in the driving seat. If they win the next 6 games, the title is theirs once again. But fascinatingly today, Becky, it's been such a busy day, so much going on. Some names you wouldn't have expected to be putting their hat in the ring as potential owners of Chelsea. And City's crosstown rivals, Manchester United, have finally made their appointment. So we've got lots coming up in just a couple of minutes.
Great. That's World Sport Up. After the break, we will be back with the second hour of Connect the World as you know. If you're a regular viewer after that, stay with us.
Hi, thanks for joining us. Welcome along to World Sport Live from London with me, Amanda Davis. It has been one of the worst kept secrets in football. You wonder if he might have wanted to change his mind given some of the recent performances, but it has now been officially announced that Erik ten Hag will be the new manager of Manchester United from the end of this season. The 52-year-old set to leave his role at Ajax in Holland to take over from Ralf Rangnick, who's been in charge, you might remember, on an interim basis since Ole Gunnar Solskjaer left his post in November. Ten Hag is the 5th permanent manager to be appointed by United since Alex Ferguson retired in 2013. The club have said that, subject to work visa requirements, his deal is set to run until June 2025, with the option to extend for a further year. And a little bit earlier on, I got the thoughts of Chris Vokes, football journalist and content manager at The Sportsman.
We've seen successive managers, very different types of managers given the job at Manchester United. Almost without fail, they will say afterwards that they didn't get certain support that they were expecting a club like Manchester United to offer them. Ten Hag will need that undoubtedly. United have made kind of steps towards developing a structure in place behind a manager. ahead of this appointment. It's just, I suppose, we'll see what develops from the summer onwards in terms of how he fits into that and whether he's the right man to get the best out of the football side of the business.
Yeah, he said in his statement, I know the history of this great club and the passion of the fans, and I am absolutely determined to develop a team capable of delivering the success they deserve. That is the question, isn't it? Will he be given the support to be able to develop that team? How confident are you that those upstairs in the boardroom, now it is Richard Arnold, isn't it? How confident are you that those around him have learnt their lessons of their mistakes of recent time?
Well, you would hope so, wouldn't you? Because it's been going on for 9 years now. And I think the key word in that statement from Ten Hag is develop. I don't think any Manchester United manager since Sir Alex Ferguson has been allowed to develop anything. They haven't been given the time to do that. They've kind of got to see this summer as day one, to start all over again. The squad is all over the place. It's been built in the visions of 5 different managers. Ten Hag ought to be given the light to get rid of who he wants, bring in pretty much who he wants, as long as it's within this vision that he sold to the club in his interview. And I think he will get a little bit more license than previous managers just because they've reached such a position now that is completely out of keeping with what we've expected of Manchester United for the past 30, 35 years, that he should get a little bit more of a free rein. And given the way that he won them over in his interview, you would think him every little bit of support that you can possibly get.
Let's wait and see. We have said that before, haven't we? Well, Manchester City won't be giving up this Premier League title without a fight. They are back on the top once again after victory over Brighton, but manager Pep Guardiola admitted his side, no, they can't drop a single point between now and the end of the season if they want to hold off the threat of Liverpool. Going into 10, and after a pretty frustrating first half, it was a returning Kevin De Bruyne who combined with Riyad Mahrez to break. Meanwhile, Thomas Tuchel's Arteta's side got their pursuit of a top 4 finish back on track. 6 games of the Premier League season to go. Manchester City leading the way, as I said, a point clear of Liverpool. Chelsea in 3rd with a 5-point gap and a game in hand on Spurs and Arsenal. Now, not content with 7 Formula 1 world titles and 23 Grand Slams between them, Lewis Hamilton and Serena Williams have now set their sights on Premier League football. Yep, the story you were not expecting coming up, and so too Didier Drogba, from legendary player to presidential candidate. I've been speaking to the man himself on his plans for football in the Ivory Coast. Stay with us. Welcome back with the story you weren't expecting today. Lewis Hamilton and Serena Williams have not only joined together, but joined the fight to become the new owners of Chelsea, linking up with a consortium led by former Liverpool boss Sir Martin Broughton and the head of World Athletics, Sebastian Coe. The bid is one of the three being considered by US merchant bank the Rain Group to take over ownership of the European champions from Roman Abramovich, with final bids having been submitted last week. That is certainly a story we will continue to watch. But what Chelsea could have done with a man of the goal-scoring talents of Didier Drogba last night after that defeat to Arsenal we told you about. The former striker has just been announced as one of the newest stars inducted into the Premier League's Hall of Fame. But this week, he's focused on something different, standing as one of the 6 presidential candidates to become president of the Ivory Coast Football Association. I got the chance to speak to him ahead of Saturday's election from the Ivorian city of Abidjan. He started with addressing why he thinks he's faced some opposition to standing.
I was not the plan. I was not the plan, and I come there and I speak and I talk football, and I want things to change. We don't have a women league. The women league is played in 2 weeks. Can you imagine that? The players are not paid. When they are paid, they pay less than $20 when they are paid. And they're not ready for my candidacy because obviously the population is behind me. Some voters are behind me because they want a change. And they all lost their dignity, while a lot of money has been spent from many years into football, from FIFA, from CAF, and all the sponsors. But it doesn't benefit the actors, which is not normal. And that's the reason why I'm competing.
How much do you think African football should be taking from elsewhere? How much should it be carving its own path in terms of the structures and the way of doing things?
I've been around many countries, many continents, and I've seen a lot of African talents everywhere I've been. Just look at the French national team who won the World Cup. I would say 70%, 80% of them are not born in Africa, but originally from Africa, from their parents, or they're born in Africa and then they went to France at a very young age. We have those talents here. What we don't really do is to structure them, is to put a team around them, to let them understand that they have the qualities.
Not given your time again, but if situations were different, would you have liked to have played your career in Africa?
To be honest, I really wanted in 2017, my dream was to finish playing with an African team on the continent, just to promote our continent and to show that, yes, it is possible for us, big players, let me say that please, to finish on our continent. So that's actually the beginning of my interrogations. I'm like, how is it possible? How can I do that? Brazilians, when they're tired, they go back to playing in Brazil, and they're doing well, and they have a good life. And I wanted to do the same thing, to go back and play in Ivory Coast, but it's not possible.
You saying that takes me back to those comments which were received with a lot of criticism, weren't they, from the FIFA president, Gianni Infantino, when he was talking around his idea for this biennial World Cup. And he said he thought it could give hope to Africans. What was your reaction when you heard him say that?
I think it's true. And I know this question brings a lot of controversy, but this is something that you have to consider. And African countries and South American countries and Asian countries have to consider. We're losing a lot of talents, and I really believe that it's going to be more competitive because, yes, we want the World Cup to still be special. It will just give other countries less fortunate more options and more chance to qualify to play the World Cup. I believe it's the game for the people, not only the game for those who succeeded at first and still want to be the only one to win the World Cup.
Didier Drogba speaking ahead of the election for the presidency of the Ivory Coast, which takes place on Saturday. We've got more from my chat with him coming up on Friday's editions of World Sport, where we hear all things Chelsea, both on and off the pitch. But for now, back to you, Becky.
It's absolutely fascinating, isn't it? Thank you, Amanda. I'll be back with more Connect the World after this short break. Stay with us.
CNN London, this is Connect the World with Becky Anderson.
Well, smaller European countries with an outsized view have emerged as significant players in aiding Ukraine's fight against Russian aggression. This hour, my interviews with Estonia's president and the Czech Republic's foreign minister. I'm Becky Anderson. Hello and welcome back to Connect the World. And we begin with what is much-needed aid on the way to Ukraine, now 57 days since this Russian invasion began. In the last hour, President Joe Biden announcing the US will send Kyiv an additional $800 million in military assistance, including heavy artillery and ammunition. Mr. Biden saying the war has entered what he calls a critical window and promising that the US and its allies are moving as fast as possible to help Ukraine defend itself.
As Russia continues to grind out the military advances and their military advances and the brutalities against Ukraine, Putin is banking on us losing interest. That's been my view. You heard me say this from the beginning. He was counting on NATO, European Union, our allies in Asia, cracking, moving away. He's betting on Western unity will crack. He's still betting on that. And once again, we're going to prove him wrong.
Well, meanwhile, on the ground, Russian President Vladimir Putin claiming victory in the battered port city of Mariupol. Though President Biden calls that questionable, saying there's no evidence it has completely fallen. Mr. Putin cancelling plans to storm a steel factory there, where hundreds of Ukrainians remain barricaded, and said he says he wants to block anyone from escaping and claims he'll offer, quote, dignified treatment to those who surrender. Well, all of this as a desperate push is underway to save civilians who are still trapped in Mariupol. Evacuations were scheduled to resume a few hours ago. The mayor says some 200 people have gathered, but so far buses have not arrived for them. 4 did manage to leave through a newly agreed corridor Wednesday, far fewer buses than had been hoped for. The Ukrainian Deputy Prime Minister calling the security situation difficult. Well, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is likening the Russian siege of Mariupol to a terrorist operation and warns his forces simply do not have enough serious and heavy weapons to defeat the Russian army. Well, let's bring in US security correspondent Kylie Atwood in Washington to discuss what is on its way now, this new aid package from the US. And the president earlier quick to score out what this equipment is in this new package of aid and why it is so important at this point. What did he tell us?
Yeah, the president was very clear in saying that Ukraine is right now in a critical window in this war, and this moment in time could very well determine what the next phase of the war could look like. That's why it is critical that the United States continue providing this military assistance to Ukraine. He explained that this $800 million in security assistance for Ukraine is going to include things like more than 100,000 rounds of ammunition, heavy artillery, tactical drones, some things that we saw in the package that was announced by the Biden administration last week. But this is more of that. And it comes, of course, as the Ukrainians have been saying that they need these sort of things for the fight in the East, because that fight looks different than the previous fights that they have taken on when it comes to this Russian invasion. We should also note that President Biden said that the Biden administration is also going to be asking Congress for more funding when it comes to this military support. The amount that Congress has allocated to spend on this is going to be reaching its end here, and so the Biden administration wants to make sure that this continues on. And when it comes to the Ukrainians who have had to flee their country, many of them do have family members here in the United States, and President Biden announced that his administration is going to be developing an expedited process for those Ukrainians who have ties to the U.S. And a sponsor here in the United States can apply for them to come to the U.S. through humanitarian parole. It's going to expedite the process for them to get here, with the Biden administration saying that they have committed to admitting up to 100,000 Ukrainians who have been displaced because of this war.
Joe Biden, very specific about the artillery, the howitzers, the ammunition that was on its way. He also talked about 2 other things, which I think bear just discussing. He said tactical drones were on their way, and that the U.S. is helping others in region, as it were, and this will be in the Baltic states and beyond, helping others transfer weaponry across. So it's not just about what the US is up to, but also the US support for other allies as they provide heavy equipment for this second phase. And he did mention, didn't he, that this second phase is so important. It's going to be a very, very tough fight for the Ukrainians, and that everyone must stick together on this. He mentioned that a number of times. He said, you know, it is all about maintaining unity at this point.
That's right, unity and momentum. He underscored the need for this assistance to keep coming because, as you said, this is a critical moment that could determine how successful the Ukrainians ultimately are in this war. And as you said, the Biden administration has been working with its NATO allies, not just to get U.S. weaponry to Ukraine, but also to get Russian-made weaponry to Ukraine. And that's because the Ukrainians, many of them have been more trained with that type of weaponry. So it is more effective for them to take straight onto the battlefield. Now, interestingly enough, we have watched certain countries be very explicit about what they are providing to Ukraine. Other countries be less explicit. This is a fog of war situation, and they are playing into that because they don't want Russia to know everything that is going on to the battlefield. But the Biden administration has been very clear about what they have provided, and I think think we have watched while they have provided more heavy weaponry, more long-range weaponry, the types of things exactly what the Ukrainians have said that they need.
Kylie, thank you. Kylie Atwood's at the State Department. Well, now more on the desperate situation in Mariupol. I mean, you know, if ever there was a place that needed support, it is this. President Zelensky says about 120,000 people remain trapped there. Well, this network, CNN, spoke to a wounded fighter who says for those remaining in the city, time is short. Matt Rivers has more.
The Azovstal steel plant, housing Mariupol's last line of defense. If the defenders here fall, so goes the city. A few days ago, George Kuparashvili says he was right in the heart of the fight.
Honestly, I tell you that I never seen such a brutal, devastating war, because Russians are just trying to execute the civilians.
He spoke to us via video chat from an undisclosed location. Severely injured during the fighting, he says he was smuggled out to recover. He is a Georgian national and a commander in the Azov battalion, one of the few remaining units left defending the city. He says he was among the soldiers fighting the Russians, while at the same time taking care of hundreds of civilians sheltering in the area, some of which purportedly seen here in video CNN can't verify, posted on the Ukrainian government's social media.
So how long do you think your group can take care of all of those people and yourselves?
That's hard to answer. That's hard to answer for me. Time is short. That's what I'm trying to say.
Tens of thousands of citizens in besieged Mariupol still need to be evacuated. On Wednesday, a slight glimmer of hope. A humanitarian corridor agreed to by both sides, where civilians could evacuate Mariupol, heading to Mangush, then Berdyansk, and then onward, eventually to the Ukrainian-held city of Zaporizhia. The city's mayor urging people to use it. He said, "Dear people of Mariupol, during these long and incredibly difficult days you survived in inhuman conditions. You may have heard different things, but I want you to know the main thing. They are waiting for you in Zaporizhia. It's safe there." Video from Mariupol's city council shows buses lined up ready to take those who wanted to leave. It's unclear how many got on, but a regional official says fewer people left than he hoped.
For many, leaving is a difficult choice. It requires trusting that the Russian military will not harm those trying to leave. And yet this is the same military that has spent the entire war systematically targeting civilians across the country.
And yet the city has become unlivable. For the military units still resisting, Kuparashvili says they're caring for soldiers and civilians, sometimes with the same injuries due to Russian shelling.
It's a triage, child or soldier. And I've seen a lot of times there was a soldier say, go ahead, take a child. It's a priority.
A commander inside the steel plant has urged the international community to set up an evacuation route using a third party, another country that might be able to facilitate the transfer of soldiers and civilians to safety. If that doesn't happen, Kuparashvili says Russia will continue the bombardment, and it will end only one way.
There will be nobody left in this area. There will be dead, all the children. I'm not talking about the soldiers, but the civilians will be eliminated. And it's going to be on us, on a civilized world.
Well, Matt is in Lviv for you this hour in Western Ukraine. Those are chilling words at the back end of that report. What else did you learn?
Well, you know, I asked him, Becky, I said, you know, his fellow comrades in the Azov battalion, I said, is there a world in which they would consider surrendering to the Russians? And he said, absolutely not. He said they are so convinced that the Russians hate them so much for resisting the way they have, that if they were to surrender, the Azov battalion believes that they would be categorically and summarily executed. And so he said, basically, for those battalion members who are still fighting in Mariupol, there's two ways out. He said it'll either be an evacuation done by a third-party country, or they will die fighting where they are. It was a pretty stark contrast, but he sounded very firm when he said that. I think at this point we have to take them at their word.
Matt Rivers on the story for you. Matt, thank you. Well, Russia's aggression in Ukraine is further isolating it from Europe and the Western world, and Moscow is responding right back. The Kremlin says it is closing the Estonian, the Latvian and the Lithuanian consulates in St. Petersburg. The Foreign Ministry says consular employees from all three Baltic countries are now no longer welcome there. The Russian government says it was done out of reciprocity after Russian diplomats were asked to leave those countries and for Baltic military assistance to Ukraine. Well, we've seen several smaller European countries like Estonia taking a larger role in offering military weaponry and humanitarian support to Ukraine. Earlier, I interviewed the president of Estonia. He met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky last week and asked him whether he believes larger countries with stronger economies, such as Germany, should be doing more.
They started to doing more, and also US is providing now military and sophisticated military assistance. So it takes time probably for bigger countries, and we have experience already from past. We do remember how it was in 20th centuries, before the Second World War and after the Second World War. So we have this kind of experience, and it's not only a question of Baltic states or small states, it's a question of Europe and security of Europe, which has dramatically changed during the past 2 months.
The US State Department yesterday suggesting that NATO allies could actually be on the ground going forward and help in evacuation corridors. We specifically talking to the issue of Mariupol, where so many tens of thousands of people still remain and still are in a desperate state. What do you know about the detail of any plans for NATO allies to be active on the ground in Ukraine?
Well, so obviously, we don't want to actively be involved in this war. But with military assistance and also this corridor you mentioned, it's a matter of discussions. We shouldn't avoid these kind of discussions and to end up with a result or some kind of alternatives. So this is a democracy. I mean, we should discuss this openly to end this war as soon as possible.
So do you expect to see NATO boots on the ground helping with evacuation?
It's very difficult to predict, but different NATO countries provide assistance already. So it's and as Kremlin said, it's a war against NATO, it's a war against free world, it's a war against West. So we are involved anyway.
But there haven't been any boots on the ground and there haven't been any jets in the air. I mean, let's be quite clear about this. To date, do you believe that may change?
It depends what Putin's next steps are. If he start to use chemical weapons or anything worse, of course we should be on ground.
Well, that was the Estonian president speaking to me earlier. That full interview is now online. Coming up on Connect the World, keeping that theme going this hour, a small country, a big heart and even bigger weapons, all to help Ukraine. I'll be talking to the Czech foreign minister and asking why the world's smaller economies are making such a big impact against Russia's war. And one small farm, 6 cows, are now dodging Russian rockets. Ukrainian farmers find themselves in the midst of this war. All that is just ahead. On today's edition of Connect the World, we are highlighting a big moment for some smaller countries stepping up to help Ukraine. The Czech Republic is one of those nations that is pulling more than its weight, as it were. A recent report says that Prague has sent Soviet-licensed tanks and armoured vehicles to Ukraine, and that has sparked a furious warning from Moscow. And Prague's response, well, it's been a bit of a shrug, to be honest. Czech Foreign Minister Jan Lipavsky joins me now live from the capital of Prague. Thanks for joining us, sir. Your country's been supplying a lot of military equipment to Ukraine since this invasion began. Early this month, you provided Soviet-era tanks, the first time that had happened from a NATO country. The Czech Republic, no military powerhouse. So why is it so important for you to be taking this strong position?
Hello, Becky. It is very important for us. And the reason is that Ukraine is fighting for its own survival. But if Putin's aggression would continue and Ukraine would fall, he would continue, and we have already been occupied by Russians once in 1968, and we don't want to repeat that.
Well, Russia's condemned your moves, warning the Czech Republic through a diplomatic letter against supplying other countries with weapons of Soviet origin. How did you respond to that letter?
We haven't responded. There's no legal basis for what they have claimed. There's no point to reply such request.
And do you expect to provide more military hardware as this new phase begins?
We are doing what we can. We are sending a lot of weapons. I would like to thank all other countries who are providing weapons: USA, Great Britain, Poland, other European countries. It is very important to provide Ukraine with any necessary means for them to survive and win over Russia in this horrific, barbaric war. Look what they are doing in Bucha. Look what they are doing in Mariupol.
My question was, will the Czech Republic provide more?
Yes, we will continue. We will continue.
Do you share Joe Biden's concern that the maintaining of unity amongst allies at this point is absolutely crucial?
I absolutely share it. My first concern is to have a unity on a level of the European Union, since 5 packages of sanctions already had been adopted. We are preparing the 6th package of sanctions. We need to get rid of our dependency on Russian oil and gas. So those are tasks which lies in front of us. So unity is very important, very important.
Yeah, and then the Czech Republic, of course, has historically gotten nearly 90% of its gas from Russia. Over the years, you have been trying to find other sources of energy. Other countries have not done that, quite frankly, and I'm thinking about the Germans first and foremost.
My government is now working on solution to that. I would like to see some European solution. It won't be easy, but we will make it. We will make it.
By when?
This is something we are now in the middle of that, and it's quite complicated debate. So there's no clear answer from my side right now.
The worry is that this issue of Russian gas could split what is otherwise a relatively still unified bloc. Does that concern you?
It is a concern. However, I would like to mention that Putin manipulated market with gas last autumn, and he wasn't able to disunite Europe. Europe was very united and has a united stand on Russia aggression against Ukraine, and I am very optimistic that we will be able to find a common solution again.
We've been talking about military hardware as well as these sanctions. Do you believe larger countries with stronger economies, such as Germany, for example, should be doing more with regard military hardware and into Ukraine, more aid, like the sort of work that you've been doing?
I would like to see that those countries would be doing more. On the other side, I understand that they have their own domestic situation. I have to respect that. But to see Germany sending significant amounts of weapons to Ukraine, that would help a lot, definitely.
Do you believe it's been talk just today about the possibility of a third country being involved in the evacuation of Mariupol? I'm sure you are well aware of what is going on there. This is a besieged port city, almost entirely ruined, with 120,000 people who need to get out. That would be a NATO member. If so, having a NATO member on the ground, helping with an evacuation, would be a game changer, would it not?
It would be a game changer, and I would like to save heroes of Mariupol, and I would like to see that we are able to help people of Mariupol. But any negotiation which to this day was done with Russia had not led to successful creating of humanitarian corridors or anything like that. So, but yes, if that would be possible, I would agree with that. We have to help those people.
And would the Czech Republic be prepared to be involved?
It matters what would be necessary to be given from the Czech side. Honestly, we don't have any real means that would be have to done by different countries. But yes, politically we are ready to support such thing.
Is it clear who would be involved at this point? Is there any detail on this plan?
No. I don't have any detail on that.
You're heading to Washington next week. You'll meet with Secretary of State Antony Blinken. What will your message be to the Foreign Secretary and his president?
Yes, I'm coming next week to DC to meet with my friend Tony Blinken, and I have two messages for him. First of all, we are your reliable partner in the Central Europe, and we are very much aligned on Ukraine and Russia threats. And the second message is, don't forget about China. We are very closely watching what China is doing on Russia aggressions against Ukraine, and they are not doing much. And would they start to helping Russia in any significant way, that would have severe consequences on the EU-Chinese relationship.
We're 57 odd days now into this war. From your perspective in the Czech Republic, how has this changed the European space?
We have realized that nothing is given, that the comfortable life is not guaranteed. You have to fight for your freedom and independence, and this is what the Czech society has learned.
It's good to have you on. Thank you very much indeed for giving us your time today. Let's speak again when you get back from the States. That is the
Becky,
Czech Republic's Foreign Minister. Thank you. Well, on the brink again, violence flares at a key holy site in Jerusalem, and Israel is pointing the finger at Hamas. Plus, the clashes in Jerusalem also inflaming tensions between Israel and Jordan. We're going to speak with the Jordanian Foreign Minister. Up next. Palestinians and Israeli security forces clashed earlier today at a key holy site in Jerusalem as the worst tensions in months continue to simmer. Videos show Palestinians inside the Al-Aqsa Mosque launching fireworks towards police and police firing stun grenades back. Meanwhile, Israel is blaming Hamas after they say at least 5 rockets were fired from the Gaza Strip into Israeli territory on Wednesday. In response, Israeli forces struck an underground complex in Gaza that produces rocket engines. CNN's Hadas Gold is following the latest developments from Jerusalem, and she joins us now live. Hadas.
Becky, Jerusalem has been on edge for a week as we've seen periodic clashes and violence breaking out on or around the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound, which is also known as the Temple Mount to Jews. As you noted, we have been seeing video from this morning showing Palestinians launching fireworks from inside the Al-Aqsa Mosque and Israeli police on the compound shooting stun grenades at the entrance to the mosque. The Israeli police saying that they responded to what they called rioters throwing stones and fireworks, that they operated to, quote, enable the public a safe freedom of worship. Now, Becky, the clashes today were not nearly as bad as the ones we saw last Friday, where more than 150 people were injured. But earlier on Wednesday evening, tensions in Jerusalem had spiked once again when Jewish extremists attempted to march through the Muslim quarter of the Old City. They were blocked from doing so by Israeli police for safety reasons, but still there were some clashes in the Old City streets between those Jewish extremists, Palestinians, and police. Meanwhile, to the south overnight, as you noted, rockets were fired from Gaza into Israel. This is the second time in a week that rockets have been fired from Gaza into Israel. The Israeli Defense Force responding with what it called the most significant airstrike since that 11-day war with Hamas last year. Keep in mind, of course, that it was similar clashes at Al-Aqsa, similar tensions in Jerusalem that helped spark that 11-day war last year. The IDF saying that they struck a rocket manufacturing plant, but there have been no reported major injuries either in Gaza or in Israel as a result of that exchange of fire. And Becky, I do have to say, it doesn't seem like right now the militants in Gaza are gearing up for another major escalation. However, Hamas has warned that their, quote, finger is on the trigger as they watch events unfold in Jerusalem. Now, since this morning, things have been calm in Jerusalem. But the diplomatic and political ramifications from the last few weeks of tensions are still being felt. Israeli emissaries in places like the UAE and Jordan have been called in for talks. The Americans have sent a delegation from the State Department here in order to calm the situation. And more importantly for Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, for his internal politics, the United Arab List Party, that first Arab party to fully enter the Israeli government, has frozen their membership. It's still frozen right now as a result of what's been happening at Al-Aqsa. That's deepening the political problems for the Israeli government that already lost its razor-thin majority and could put them on the path to losing the government and to potentially new elections. Becky.
Yeah, no, fascinating. We are just setting up to speak to the Jordanian foreign minister about this very subject. It was important that you laid out the perspective from Tel Aviv as to what is going on, and this. And we've been talking for weeks now, haven't we, about concerns about a real escalation in this. So to hear that that is not something that the authorities believe is necessarily the result, then that is a good thing. I'm going to leave you there. We thank you very much indeed for joining us. Actually, we're still setting up the Jordanian foreign minister. So let me just ask you this one question. You've had the response of the Jordanians, the response of the UAE. You know that there is a US delegation in town. Is this about a long-term solution, or just ensuring that we don't see a massive escalation at this point?
I really think right now it's just about ensuring that there won't be some massive escalation. There are so many concerns about this blowing up into what we saw last year, that 11-day war between the Hamas-led militants in Gaza and the Israeli army, about things just blowing even further and further out. There is, I think, an acknowledgement that in Israeli politics, things are very much on edge. As I noted, the current coalition government, they lost that razor-thin majority. They could be on the path towards more elections. And even if they weren't, this new government is made up of such a diverse group of parties from the right to the left, secular and religious, and of course that the first Arab party to sit in government. They have been very clear that they have no intention to try to tackle these big issues. They have no intention to try to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict right now. So right now, the most of the focus is just to keep things calm and keep the violent away for now.
Hadas, thank you. Well, multiple Arab leaders have condemned Israeli police actions in and around the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem. This week, Israel's neighbour Jordan summoned Israel's deputy chief of mission in Amman, while Jordan accuses Israel of illegal measures aimed at, quote, changing the identity of the holy sites. The statement also hinted at growing dissatisfaction in Jordan at how visits by Jewish groups to the site known to Israelis as the Temple Mount are being carried out. Israel said Jordan's response provided backing for Palestinians committing acts of violence in Jerusalem. Well, Jordan's Hashemite monarchy has, of course, been the custodian of Jerusalem's holy sites since 1924, paying for their upkeep. In 1948, Jordan actually controlled the West Bank and East Jerusalem. It lost those territories to Israel during the Six-Day War in 1967. But still, Jordan continues to play an important role in overseeing arrangements at the holy sites, known as the status quo. Well, I want to bring in Jordan's Foreign Minister, Ayman Safadi. He joins me now from the capital of Amman. Foreign Minister, who is to blame for the violence that we have seen in Jerusalem lately, particularly around the Al-Aqsa Mosque?
Well, good evening, Becky. Basically, what Jordan has wanted all through is to make sure that the legal and historical status quo at the Haram is respected, so that we maintain the calm that everybody worked so hard to achieve, avoid violence, and then move towards a political horizon that will bring about an end to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, so that everybody gets the peace that is right for all. What happened in Al-Aqsa is, of course, a reflection of the ongoing tension that has been escalating for weeks before the events of last Friday. Even before the beginning of the month of Ramadan, you saw the intense activities nicely led, and the effort Jordan made to make sure that we mitigate against a deja vu, basically, in terms of what happened last year.
You're not answering the question. The question is, who is to blame for this violence, with respect?
Who's to blame? Initially, the fact that there's no political horizon, the fact that the status quo is not being respected, the fact that we've seen a lot of escalatory measures by settlers and by extremists, and the fact that Israeli forces entered into, stormed into the Aqsa last week. We're not looking for here in terms of what's happening now. What we want to do is what we've always done is how do we look forward? How do we move beyond the current crisis, contain the tension, ensure respect for the status quo at the Haram, and move forward, all of us, towards maintaining the calm and achieving peace.
Israel has accused Jordan of encouraging Palestinians, who it says are committing acts of violence in Jerusalem over the past couple of days. Your response?
I haven't heard an Israeli official make this accusation. We've heard a lot of reports. Basically, what I would say is that Jordan's record, Jordan's history is clear, that we always encourage dialogue, always encourage negotiations, always encouraged peaceful means of settling the conflict. At the same time, we've always been very clear to the Israelis and to everybody that the status quo of the Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa of the Haram must be respected, that violating that status quo is going to lead to an explosion, given the sacredness of the Haram and the overall tension, which is pretty much the outcome of failure to move forward towards political horizon. So I would say that we are very clear as Jordan. We've always worked for peace. We're going to continue to work for peace. And what we've encouraged the Israelis to do is to respect the status quo. And all our conversation with the Palestinians was geared to working together to maintain the peace and make sure that we maintain the calm.
My colleague Christian Amanpour spoke exclusively with Israel's Prime Minister Naftali Bennett earlier. I just want you to have a listen to this exchange.
When the world sees, and when Palestinians see, and when your region sees Israeli soldiers inside that mosque, it creates a lot of tension, a lot of unease. Why do you allow Israeli soldiers to go into that mosque?
Yeah, well, Christia, there you go again, starting the story in the middle. But the actual fact is that last Friday, at about 5 a.m. in the morning, roughly 300 Palestinian rioters entered Temple Mount Mosque with explosives, with stones, they began desecrating their own mosque, burning, throwing stones, and preventing about 80,000 decent Muslims from going to pray. My responsibility as Prime Minister of Israel is to provide freedom of prayer to everyone in Jerusalem, including Muslims, which is why I had to send in policemen to remove the rioters, and it worked. Indeed, 80,000 Muslims went on later to pray peacefully. So, you know, when faced with violence, you have to act tough.
Foreign Minister, I just want to push you a little further on what we were just discussing before in response to what you've just heard there. Jordan isn't being accused of encouraging Palestinians to commit acts of violence by any Israeli lawmaker. But it's the response of the Jordanians to what is going on that is seen as encouraging activity by Palestinians within the compound. Does that make sense? I just want to get your response to that specifically.
No, it doesn't. It does not make sense, Becky. What Jordan did is took the same stand it has taken historically over decades. It took last year, it took this year, that the status quo, the historical legal status quo of the Haram must be respected, that freedom to prayer for Muslims in the Haram must be respected, limitations on access to the Haram must be lifted. That is what Jordan did, and that's and what also Jordan did is urged everybody to make sure that we mitigate against any eruption of violence. The beginning of the story, Becky, is that we have a conflict that continues to evade a solution. We've worked for the last few months, years before even, to try and create a political horizon that will address the issue that there is an occupation, that there is no horizon to solving it, that we must move towards ending all tension and move towards the two-state solution.
And a president does feel, sorry, Foreign Minister, but President, it does feel like you were working on sort of short-term fixes as opposed to, you know, long-term plans. Is then, you know, what chance a long-term peace plan at this point?
We're working short-term in making sure that the last 10 days of Ramadan go in peace, that violations stop, and that calm is restored. We're working medium-term and making sure that we address the reasons for the violence that we saw erupt in Jerusalem and at the Haram, and see how we can all have a conversation, have a discussion on how we prevent those from happening. And we're working longer term as well in terms of getting the parties around the table and make sure that we have a path towards restoring negotiations to get to the peace that we want.
Let me ask you this one last question. Jordan has been increasingly vocal in its criticisms of Israel's actions in East Jerusalem. Are you and King Abdullah, frankly, getting fed up with your neighbor at this point?
We continue to be frustrated with the absence of political horizon. We continue to be frustrated with having to deal with the same scenarios year in, year out, because the right thing is not done. And the right thing is, again, to respect the status quo at the Haram and also find political horizons to solving the conflict. That is the beginning of the story, Becky. And Jordan continues to engage very openly with the Israeli government. We engage with the Palestinians. We engage with our partners in the world with the same message. We need to solve this conflict. We need to have peace for all, and we need to have practical steps that will mitigate against us finding ourselves in the same place over and over. What we're frustrated with is, again, having to deal with the same situation with the absence of any longer-term, genuine, institutional, meaningful effort to try and address the cause roots of the problem and to prevent violence from erupting again and hurting everybody in Israel, Palestine, in Jordan and beyond.
Jordan's Foreign Minister speaking to us from Amman this evening. Thank you, sir. Coming up, how one Tanzanian tribe is protecting the lions they used to hunt. That is next. changing cultural traditions to protect wildlife takes time, effort, and trust, which is what our next story is all about. British conservationist Amy Dixon is working with a tribe in Tanzania to preserve what she says is one of the most significant lion populations left on Earth. Her work was chosen by Rolex Awards laureate Shafkat Hussein, who is our guest editor on Call to Earth this week, as we focus on efforts around the world to protect big cats.
Sunrise on the edge of Ruaha National Park. Here in central Tanzania, livestock is life.
Our tribe believes livestock is part of the family, and we cannot live without them.
Another day, another deadly threat for livestock and people. Stefano Asicheka is part of the Barabig, a little-known tribe with a long history with lions.
In our tribe, our customs and tradition raise us to have pride in killing a lion as a young man. And we are made to believe that once you kill one, it at least reduces the threat.
Traditionally, young warriors like this would gain rewards and status from killing lions. Part of the Lion Defenders program, Asicheka is showing them ways to protect the tribe while preserving the pride.
Lion defenders work in the village areas, and their task is to survey the borders early in the morning for lion tracks and to inform herders of the safety grazing areas.
The Lion Defenders are part of the Ruaha Carnivore Project, founded by Amy Dickman in 2009. When she first came here 4 years previously, things were bad.
It was the highest rate of lion killing that had been detected in East Africa in modern times.
She said she had to work hard to gain the tribe's trust.
We said, we are just here to find out why you're killing these lions, and if there's a way that you could achieve whatever you achieve through it, through conservation rather than killing.
And eventually, persistence paid off.
They really opened up to us, and since then it's really been a transformative relationship in working with them for conservation. But we certainly know that the lion killings have decreased by over 70% in the core area that we're working in.
The project offers financial incentives to protect lions by funding community services like education, doctors, and vets.
We'd love to collaborate with you guys because they need.
Dickman and her team have joined forces with other conservation projects in Kenya and Zambia to form a larger nonprofit, Lion Landscapes.
It really can be a way of uplifting people and making sure that wildlife is a way to get people out of poverty as well.
Asicheka also gives tours of the park to help his tribe see wildlife from a new perspective.
Many people love seeing animals. Even the locals who used to hunt them want to see the lions. They feel a sense of ownership and get to understand the right reasons why we are protecting lions.
Let us know what you're doing to answer the call with hashtag Call to Earth. We will be right back after this for you.
This is CNN Breaking News.
Well, let's get you a little bit of breaking news just coming in. The UK Parliament is back to motion calling for the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, to be referred for investigation into whether he misled Parliament over lockdown parties. Now, earlier in the day, the Metropolitan Police in London confirmed it won't make any more Partygate fines public until after key elections next month in England. There's quite a lot going on here, isn't there? CNN's Nada Bashir joining me now live. I hope I haven't stolen your thunder, but I think there's just explain what we've got here.
Yeah, well, this is all just unfolding in the last few moments. We've seen parliamentarians debating throughout the day that motion for an inquiry to be held into whether the Prime Minister knowingly misled Parliament. And just in the last few moments, that was nodded through the MPs there approving that motion. So the Prime Minister now facing a third inquiry relating to the Partygate scandal. We've got the Metropolitan Police investigation, we've got the Cabinet Office report still ongoing, and now this parliamentary inquiry. Certainly a concern for the Conservative Party, as you mentioned, heading into those local elections. But it's actually been quite an interesting day for the party. We've seen the Conservative, the government, make a U-turn earlier in the morning, just minutes before the actual debate kicked off last night. We heard that they would propose an amendment to have this vote postponed, waiting for the Metropolitan Police investigation and the Cabinet Office report to come through, to be published. They wanted, as they said, to give lawmakers an opportunity to hear all the details. But then they withdrew that, and we heard from the Prime Minister, he said the House of Commons can do what it wants to do. He doesn't want to avoid scrutiny.
All this while he, of course, is in India, as he would describe it, getting on with the job at hand.
Well, yeah, that's been the message that he's put forward throughout this entire scandal, throughout calls for him to resign. He has said the British people don't want him to resign. He needs to get on with the job to focus on his policy priorities. He's also expressed his intention to lead the Conservative Party through the next general election. But those calls for his resignation are continuing. We heard today from more Conservative
And
MPs.
that's important, isn't it? Because the next election won't be until as early as December of 2023. So, I mean, unless there is something, that's when it's scheduled for. The question now is, would he resign or would he be forced out with a no-confidence vote? And you and I have talked at length about this. It's where he gets the support from his party members at this point. It's really got nothing to do with the British public, has it?
No, and that's the thing. I mean, that was the concern around this U-turn as well. The question of whether, in terms of the optics, whether we'd see Conservative MPs perhaps abstaining from the vote, feeling uncomfortable with the idea of preventing further scrutiny on the Prime Minister. And there has been a slight shift, perhaps, in the mood around the Conservative Party now. We are seeing more MPs expressing their discomfort with the situation, calling on the Prime Minister to resign, now expressing their support, of course, for this motion for the Prime Minister to be investigated by a parliamentary committee. So there is certainly a sense of uncertainty around the Prime Minister's position.
And just to be quite clear, this was pushed through, as we say, with a nod, as it were. So this was based on the yeas and the nays rather than an official vote. So it's not clear to us who supported this and who didn't.
That's right. But it was, you know, a palpable yay in the House of Commons. We didn't hear anyone opposing that. That is significant. We went from just yesterday expectations that the Conservative Party MPs would be instructed on a 3-line whip to vote against this. But of course, now the Prime Minister facing that third inquiry, so it's pretty significant.
As we said, he is in India cutting a trade deal at this point. Thank you. Well, that is it from the show. You've been watching 2 hours of Connect the World with me, Becky Anderson, this week. And last out of London for you, normally broadcast out of Abu Dhabi, as you will be well aware. From the team working with me here in London and those working with me around the world, particularly my colleagues in Abu Dhabi, it's a very good evening to you all.
Hello, I'm Julia Chatterley in New York, and this is One World. And we begin with a significant shift in military strategy in the shattered city of Mariupol, where a humanitarian disaster is unfolding and a chilling new threat from the Russian president. Vladimir Putin has ordered his forces not to storm a steel plant where thousands of Ukrainian soldiers and civilians are holed up. But he directed his defense minister to continue the siege so that, quote, a fly cannot get through. Mariupol is on the brink of falling. It remains under intense Russian bombardment despite an evacuation effort. And Ukraine's president says his army simply doesn't have enough serious weapons to win the fight there. But continuing the blockade in Mariupol may also represent a setback for the Kremlin. Russian forces are badly needed along the eastern front where Moscow's war is progressing. But troops are only making minor territorial gains. Neil Melvin is Director of International Security Studies at the Royal United Services Institute, and he joins us via Skype from Geneva. Neil, good to have you with us. We've seen President Putin declare success in Mariupol after weeks and weeks of fighting. Is this him cutting his losses, saying we're not going to storm this plant? In fact, we're just going to effectively starve these people out and hope they surrender? He's trying to protect his troops.
I think that's exactly it. It's hardly a victory. It's taken nearly 2 months for the Russians to suppress much of the Ukrainian resistance in Mariupol. And now there's just this outstanding pocket around the steel works, which is a mix of troops, sort of wounded troops, a lot of civilians, children, many wounded civilians. So Putin is declaring victory, but really, I mean, it's, as I say, this has taken them far too long, and they're desperate to pivot those troops to the main fight, which is increasingly now focused to the north in Donbass, where the Russians are trying to surround the Ukrainian forces.
I mean, we're showing images of this plant, and just to be clear for our viewers, this is I believe a 4¼ square mile complex that we're talking about. It's a warren of tunnels and underground bunkers. And I just want to play something for our viewers, and Neil, to get your take on it. The Security Service of Ukraine released a purported new intercepted communication between Russian soldiers. And to be clear, CNN cannot vouch for the authenticity of this record or recording. But Ukraine has previously released audio of Russian soldiers and Russian troops that have used unsecure lines of communication. Just take a listen to this.
We sat there for 3 days without anything. Our commanders, they received provisions, cigarettes, food, and our command have all off. They abandoned everyone and off. We don't even know where they are.
Jackals. Shoot them and that's it.
Just imagine they didn't provide a way to retreat, didn't say anything, didn't even bring foodstuff. Them. Shoot him. Quit. The first one.
Neil, again, I'll say CNN can't verify the authenticity of this, but we've had discussions about morale among Russian troops before, whether we're talking about the operations now in the east or what we're seeing in Mariupol. What do you make of that?
Well, as you say, I mean, it's hard to know whether it's genuine, but it certainly fits into a pattern in which we've seen a number of things. First of all, the Russians have had very poor communication internally. It's not secure. Often they're just using mobile phones. They haven't got the equipment. Secondly, morale is pretty low in many units. It's got worse. Some evidence that actually Russian troops have not been prepared to sort of fight because of this low morale and particularly poor logistics. And thirdly, I think it does also suggest that the part of the behavior that we're seeing from the Russian troops, where they're often engaging in looting, is really because they haven't got food. They're not being supplied properly. And so they're kind of living off the land. There's a breakdown in discipline in some of the units and really a distrust of the officer corps. Now, that's not true for all units, but certainly I think it does suggest that it is a serious problem for the way that the Russians are operating.
I mean, Russia continues to pile fresh battalions in for the advance that they're making in the east of the country. President Biden today announcing a whole host of new weaponry, saying he's going to go to Congress to get more money in order to provide more. I mean, the message today felt like he was saying these weapons are going to continue to come. And the message to Russia is, you're not fighting Ukraine here. You may be doing it on the ground, but you're fighting NATO's resources. The response in Russia?
Well, we've seen on Russian TV, I think, that they're becoming increasingly angry about this, and they've been trying to reframe it. The sort of the spokespeople that you see on Russian state television for the Kremlin arguing, in fact, they are fighting NATO, but NATO has been clear that they're not going to put any troops in there. But we are seeing more and more resources coming in, and Ukraine needs this because every day, I mean, they're firing tens of thousands of artillery shells. Of course, there is damage on the Ukrainian side. And the Russians are really going to throw everything that they've got now at trying to destroy the Ukrainian armed forces in the Donbass area. This is the victory that's desperately needed on the ground, but perhaps even more importantly, it's politically needed by President Putin to confirm that his invasion is a success.
I mean, that's the crucial point here, I think, is that President Putin, as we've discussed, declaring this so-called victory in Mariupol, he has a point to prove after weeks and weeks of a drawn-out offensive in parts of the country that seems to have failed, and he's moved on now and is focusing on the east. In the midst of all this, a ballistic missile launch, a decision that Putin made, and again sending a very potent message to the West about what and how they should perceive this, 1 month after the United States decided not to do a ballistic missile test because they didn't want the launch to be misconstrued. PR, an opportunity here for President Putin, or a real threat?
Yeah, well, we saw him again on state television meeting with the Minister of Defense, Shoigu, and I think this is really against the backdrop of the failure. I mean, the defeat in the battle for Kiev, of course, the terrible morale hit that they took when their flagship, the Moskva, was sunk in the Black Sea by the Ukrainians. So trying to get some good PR, declaring victory in Mariupol, although we see that actually there's not really a victory, and the troops haven't yet moved north as we thought they would. And then trying to, I think, signal to NATO that Russia remains a nuclear power. NATO should stay out of this conflict. And lastly, I would say Putin's often used new weapon systems as a backdrop to show his success. So this test was really, I think, an reaffirmation that he is the security president of Russia, that this is how his success should be measured.
Neil, great to get your insights. Thank you so much. Neil Melvin there. Now, Russia, as we've been discussing, claiming success in Mariupol, but US President Joe Biden says there's no evidence the besieged city has completely fallen. What's not disputed is the fact that a steel factory is the last pocket of resistance. Metinvest is the owner of that plant, and earlier I spoke to the CEO about the thousands of troops and civilians now trapped inside.
When the war started, we have stocked quite a good stocks of food and water in the bomb shelters at the facilities, at the plants. So for some period of time, the civilians, they were able to use it and basically survive on that. Unfortunately, all of the things, they tend to run out, especially the food and daily necessities. So I think now it's close to a catastrophe there. But as far as I understand, both the fighters and civilians that are still there, they're not giving up.
I know you've said in the past, this facility, and it's a big one, we're talking more than 4 square miles, will not be used by Russia. The workers won't work for them. Again, if the Russians do end up taking this plant and take control overall in Mariupol, are you willing to see that facility used for Russian purposes? I know at the moment you've been providing support to Ukrainian troops.
Well, we already said our shareholder and the company, it's our shareholders and the company itself has proclaimed that we will not work under the Russian occupation. Our enterprises will not be working under Russian occupation. We will not be controlling this work. We will not be providing this work. Of course, Russians can try to restart the plants. Well, let's see if they can manage that. I doubt very much. But to be honest, I still believe that Ukraine will be able to take back Mariupol, and we will be restoring those plants, and they will be working in Ukraine.
The standout from that conversation, 3 weeks of supplies, he believed, and it's now been 8 weeks of battles. The CEO of Metinvest Holdings speaking there. Now, the US president has announced a new $800 million security package for Ukraine as Russia's bloody assault in the east intensifies. Shipments of aid will include heavy artillery and ammunition. President Biden said the US and its allies are working quickly to get Ukraine the weaponry they need to defend their nation. The president also stated that the West is determined to prove Vladimir Putin wrong and stand united.
As Russia continues to grind out the military advances, and their military advances and the brutalities against Ukraine, Putin is banking on us losing interest. That's been my view. You heard me say this from the beginning. He was counting on NATO, European Union, our allies in Asia, cracking, moving away. He's betting on Western unity will crack. He's still betting on that. And once again, we're going to prove him wrong.
CNN's Jeremy Diamond is in Washington for us. Jeremy, the standout for me, I think that they recognise the importance of this moment in the battle for the east of the nation and that the support's going to keep coming and he's willing to go back to Congress to get more money to do it.
Yeah, that's right. President Biden trying to signal some urgency and also trying to show that he and his administration are moving as fast as possible to provide Ukraine with all the weapons that they need for this new phase of the war, where you're going to see much more conventional warfare, open fields, artillery, tank-focused battles that will be different from the kinds of battles that we saw around Kyiv, where the Ukrainians were able to use more like guerrilla warfare tactics to repel the Russians from capturing the capital. This $800 million of additional aid brings the total U.S. aid to Ukraine since this invasion began to $3.4 billion, half of which has come in just the last 2 weeks. And it includes more of the types of heavy weaponry that we saw the U.S. provide in that initial announcement last week for that first $800 million. 72 155 millimeter howitzers, additional drones for the Ukrainians as well, and a lot of artillery rounds as well for the Ukrainians. All of this expected to help Ukraine in that next phase of the war. President Biden making clear that the U.S. can sustain, he believes, this kind of support for Ukraine in the long term. But as you were referencing, he said that two things need to happen in order for that to continue. First of all, he said that Putin is betting on disunity among the U.S. and its allies. So far, that has been maintained, that unity has been maintained, and President Biden sounded optimistic about maintaining that unity. And then the second thing that he's going to need is additional funding from Congress. Next week, as Congress comes back into session from a recess that it's been in over the last couple of weeks, President Biden will make a supplemental budget request asking Congress for more money to ensure that this flow of weapons and ammunition and support continues to Ukraine uninterrupted.
Yes, a vitally important decision next week in Congress. Jeremy, thank you for that. Also in Washington, finance ministers from multiple countries walked out of a G20 meeting in protest on Wednesday when the Russian delegate began to speak. Economic officials from around the world are in Washington as the World Bank and IMF also hold meetings to discuss how to keep Ukraine's economy going and contain the fallout from the war. CNN's Richard Quest spoke to the head of the World Bank today in Washington. Here's what he said about dealing with the fallout from the war.
These are remarkable times. There's overlapping crises. There's COVID, there's inflation, and the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And that's been dominated the meetings, and the walkouts are related to Russia and the war, and just horrific in terms of the human price and catastrophe. And then it expands to developing countries in general. So it makes a very difficult set of meetings, I think useful timing.
The difficult, what can come out of it? I mean, at the end of, yes, you can agree sort of bilaterally and multilaterally within certain groups for further assistance, but a general agreement is impossible.
For Ukraine, there can be substantial aid. World Bank is doing that, and other organizations are, and there was substantial talk about that yesterday and today. The U.S., Japan, UK have been announcing additional aid to Ukraine. For the rest of the world, there can also be more supply of food that's produced. Canada said today it was going to produce more. India is looking for release of some of its stockpiles, and they had a specific conversation on how to do that within the international rule systems. So there's concrete things.
Our Richard Quest there speaking with the World Bank President David Malpass. Now, in normal times, Ukrainian farmers would be harvesting their winter crops over the coming months, but the war has virtually shut them down, making it incredibly difficult to plant or sell their goods. They're constantly on alert, too, for Russian rockets. Ed Levandera brings us their story.
Serhiy Yaichuk runs a one-man dairy operation. He has 6 cows on a little farm just 15 miles from the front lines of the battlefield in southern Ukraine. But neither Russian soldiers or falling rockets have stopped the 49-year-old from tending to his work. That is Sergei's house there, just in the distance, and there is an unexploded rocket that landed this close. Landed here about a week ago. Did you hear that rocket land?
Everything happened before my eyes.
The explosions erupted all around him when this strike hit. Russian rockets often target his village of 500 people.
We were covered with dust, just dust and shrapnel all the way here. I fell to the ground, crawling, not feeling my legs or arms. It was scary. For those who have not gone through this, you would not believe it.
Sergei keeps one eye on his herd and the other eye on the war. So these are Sergei's 6 dairy cows, and if you notice, he has them spread out. He wants to separate them so they don't all get killed in one strike. He must keep the cows alive. This is the life of a farmer in Ukraine. Maxim Krivenko and his family grow the traditional Ukrainian crops of wheat and sunflower on these lush, wide-open fields near the village of Yevkine. But the war has upended his business.
It's been unfortunate for all of us. Basically, everything has shut down, and we aren't working now.
Maxim says the cost of fuel and grain seeds have skyrocketed. It's difficult to find parts to repair farm machinery. He's supposed to plant this year's wheat crop in the coming weeks, but if the fighting returns to this land, it won't happen. So this is the storage area where they keep their sunflower seeds, but they haven't been able to sell it because of the war. Maxim is also stuck with an entire season's sunflower seed harvest. It just sits in this storage space. Will this war kill your business?
It's already killed it. We have stockpiled our wheat production and our sunflowers, but we aren't able to sell them. So I would say it is the beginning of the end.
Ukraine is considered the world's breadbasket, along with Russia, producing 30% of the world's wheat exports. The United Nations says this war is creating a food production crisis not seen since World War II. Thousands of Ukrainian farmers now find themselves on the front lines of this war, and their growing fields of wheat and sunflower have been turned into debris fields for missiles and rockets and other explosives. The wreckage of recent battles still sit in the farm fields. The body of a Russian soldier is buried next to this ammunition supply truck. Farm or fight is the choice facing frontline farmers. Serhiy Yaichuk has already faced this life and death decision. When the Russians invaded this village last month, Serhiy joined the fight. He was shot in the shoulder. Oh, wow. If the Russians come back, do you want to fight again?
What else can we do? I'll take my pitchfork and go fight. I will defend my village until the end.
When the war returns, the harvest will have to wait. Ed Lavandera, CNN, Yevkine, Ukraine.
Up next on One World, French President Macron sparring with his far-right challenger Marine Le Pen. Details of a debate that could shape the future of Europe in just a moment. Stay with One World. Welcome back to One World. Separate explosions in northern Afghanistan today, killing at least 15 people and injuring dozens more. Local officials say at least 10 people died after an explosion tore through a Shia mosque in Mazar-i-Sharif. ISIS-K have claimed responsibility for that attack. Meanwhile, a bomb on a bicycle exploded in the city of Kunduz, killing at least 5 people. On Tuesday, explosions at a high school and educational centre in Kabul left 6 dead. And just moments ago, the British Parliament approved the launch of another investigation into Boris Johnson and Partygate. The probe will examine whether the Prime Minister misled members of Parliament about the scandal involving Downing Street parties that violated COVID protocols. Our Nada Bashir is following developments in Parliament for us. Nada, UK politics is always very complicated. What we do know, of course, is that the British Prime Minister has been fined for his conduct. The question now is, did he mislead Parliament? And if so, what are the consequences? Talk us through what next.
Well, look, Julie, as you mentioned there, the Prime Minister now facing 3 separate investigations. That first initial one from the Sue Gray report, the Cabinet Office, the Metropolitan Police investigation, both of those still ongoing. And as we've heard there, that vote passed in Parliament. The Prime Minister now facing a parliamentary committee inquiry into whether he knowingly misled Parliament. Now, the ministerial code is very clear. If you are found to have misled Parliament, the Prime Minister would be expected to offer his resignation. And we have heard repeated calls from members of Parliament across the parties calling on the Prime Minister, as some have put it, to do the decent thing, to offer his resignation, others calling for a vote of confidence. Now, what was interesting today, the theatre of it all, was that we saw the government U-turn on an amendment put forward yesterday evening. They wanted to postpone this vote on the Labour motion for an inquiry, but just a few minutes actually before the debate today in the House of Commons started, we were informed that the Conservative MPs would no longer be whipped, that they would be free to vote as they wished on the unamended motion put forward by the Labour Party. So there are some serious questions there on the state of the Conservative Party, on the Prime Minister's confidence in the MPs who back him. There are questions over whether perhaps this was all about optics, the Prime Minister not wanting to show that there was either a rebellion in the Conservative Party, should they choose to oppose the whip, or perhaps those who abstain, showing that there is certainly some discomfort amongst MPs over the idea of putting a block between the Prime Minister being scrutinised for potentially misleading Parliament. So clearly the Prime Minister is still facing significant challenges, and of course those inquiries all still ongoing. The latest could take a matter of months, but the police inquiry, we've been told by the Met Police, they want to wrap it up as quickly as possible. And of course the Cabinet Office inquiry. So there could still be more fines, there could still be further ramifications.
Yes, and of course the UK government should be talking about far more important matters given what's going on in the world, and they continue to have to focus on this. Nada, thank you for that report there. Now, sticking with politics, French President Emmanuel Macron and rival Marine Le Pen squared off in a televised debate Wednesday night ahead of Sunday's runoff presidential election. President Macron attacked Le Pen, accusing her of ties to Russia, while Le Pen said Macron does not care about the working class, especially healthcare workers. Just take a listen.
You depend on Russian power. You depend on Mr. Putin. A few months after saying that, Madame Le Pen, you took out a loan from a Russian bank in 2015, First Czech Russian Bank. When you talk about Russia, you're not talking to other world leaders. You are talking to your banker. That is the problem, Madame Le Pen. We see it. When there are brave and difficult stands to take, neither you nor your representatives are there.
He knows very well that I am a completely free and independent woman. I defend France and the French because I'm a patriot, and I've shown that all my life.
CNN's Melissa Bell joins us now from Paris with more on the presidential race. Melissa, and I believe we've got live pictures actually of the final rally for Marine Le Pen. It looked like a rave earlier. There were flashing lights and all sorts. I think she was believed to be the runner-up in this 2 and 3/4 hour debate. Can she come to grips with the numbers that she needs in the next couple of days in order to win this, or does Macron take it?
Well, Julia, really what we've seen these last few days, even before the debate took place, were those polls widening and in the incumbent's favor. So she would have to make up a lot of that ground, at least in terms of what the polls are predicting. But they are predicting a tighter race than what we saw 5 years ago, and certainly that debate that we saw last night wasn't as scrappy and it wasn't as bad news for her as it had been then. She put on a better performance, she was better prepared, but still, as you'll see, she's out there campaigning today. Emmanuel Macron's also been campaigning. She's gone to the north of France, where so many people voted for her in the first round of the election, one of her heartlands in this country. But she's going to have to convince a lot of other people to vote for her as well beyond her base. What we saw in the first round of this election, Julia, was both Emmanuel Macron and Marine Le Pen increasing their share of the vote compared to the first round of 2017. At the time of that first round on April 11th, the polls were very tight, just a couple of percentage points between them. As the second part of the campaign, the one that takes place between the two rounds, unfolded, that gap widened. So she would have to make up a lot of lost ground in order to really present a threat to Emmanuel Macron. And yet, as we know, votes for the extreme right or for populist parties tend to be harder to gauge than ones for centrist parties. So there is, of course, the chance of an upset still. Essentially, one of the big questions will be how the very many people who voted for the far left candidate, 21% of those who voted in the first round, choose to cast their vote. That could make all the difference. Even if they don't choose Emmanuel Macron, if there is a high abstention rate amongst them, if many of them vote blank, then that will help Marine Le Pen. So we will know at 8 p.m. on Sunday which of those two visions for France has prevailed. And they are, Julia, very different.
Yeah, your point about the divide in the votes in the first round is so important, and it's what Marine Le Pen, France needs to be stitched back together. Whoever wins this has a job on their hands over the coming years. We'll see what happens on Sunday. Melissa, thank you. Now coming up, surviving Russia's brutal war. We'll hear from Ukrainian civilians who've endured the onslaught firsthand and are left with the scars. That's next. Welcome back to One World. I'm Julia Chatterley. Now, as the battle for the Donbass region continues, some Ukrainians who've survived Russia's attack on their homes near Kyiv are trying to work out what next, while fearing life will never be the same. Phil Black has been hearing their stories.
Andrei Binchenko says his life will be forever split in two, before and after the day the Russians came. He remembers the skies over his home in Hostomel, near Kyiv, suddenly swarming with dozens of attack helicopters. He says they flew in a low formation, like they were on parade. And soon after, he says, Russian ground forces approached his home. This is where he says they opened fire from a distance. An explosive round landed close by, fracturing his leg. Shrapnel piercing much of his body. But Andrei says he was lucky. He got to hospital before the Russians worked out he used to fight pro-Moscow separatists in eastern Ukraine. He says many veterans from the east were deliberately killed during the occupation. If I had not been wounded, I would have been shot too, he says. Vasily Hilko also survived Russia's occupation, but at great cost. Vasily was shocked by the Russian numbers and firepower that rolled into Bogdanivka, a tiny village northeast of the capital. So many tanks passed, he said, so much ammunition. Every house had 20 soldiers occupying it, including the house where he, his neighbors, and family were sheltering. They stayed in the basement, the Russians moved in above. One night, Vasily says, 4 drunk soldiers pushed open the basement door and screamed, "Everyone out by the count of 10, or all will be killed." Vasily says women were screaming, children crying, and as he was the last one through the door, he was blasted from behind with a shotgun. He says nothing was left of the leg, all bones destroyed, just a puddle of blood in minutes. He says 2 days later, some Russian soldiers helped him get to hospital. He still thinks they're beasts, not people. The Russian invasion of areas around Kyiv violently interrupted and ended many people's lives, and some would somehow survive brutal, intimate encounters, leaving them forever changed. Phil Black, CNN, Bogdanivka, Ukraine.
Now, so many innocent civilians, like those that you just saw in that report, are now living under Russian occupation, in constant fear for their safety and their lives as this brutal war marches on. Our next guest was one of those people. Anastasia recently fled from occupied Kherson, where she was born and raised, and she joins us now from Odessa. For her safety and security, we're not using her last name, nor are we going to discuss her family. Anastasia, thank you for being brave enough to talk to us today. I want to start by asking you about the day where 5 Russian officers came into the apartment that you lived in with your boyfriend. They took your phones, they looked through your phone and saw that you'd written things on social media that were negative about Russia. And they asked if you were a reporter. What was that day like and how frightened were you?
Yeah, it was just a normal day, and there was a moment when we heard that someone started to knock on all the doors in our 5-floor house, and we didn't even realize that we can be the ones they were looking for. The reason was actually the CCTV camera on our balcony, and they wanted to find to whom it belongs to and why it is there. So they came to our apartment and they first asked for our documents and why we needed that camera, and then they wanted to see our phones. We were very afraid because first of all, we know that they kidnap people here. They can kill some people, and they can also even do something terrible with the women, you know, like raping, etc. First of all, I wrote a message to my brother about what is going on and to my HR to let her know that if I don't appear, why it happens. I didn't want to let my parents know about it. because I didn't want them to stress at that moment. And then, you know, they came into our apartment and they started to look for something forbidden, like weapons. I don't know, maybe they thought we are some kind of secret agents following them from the camera. And then they started to ask about what they found in our phones. I erased all the photos and videos since the beginning of war from my phone and from the bin. And actually they started to read all the conversations with other people, and they started to question me if I'm a journalist, who I am, etc. They didn't believe that we attended the manifestations for free. They asked us like 3 times, are you sure nobody paid you? We said no. And they said, we don't believe you just did on your personal initiative. That's how they are. They really don't believe it's possible. And then in the end, they were just not happy about all the hate for Russians in my phone, and they decided to give me a new life. So they erased completely all in my iPhone. They asked for the password from my Apple ID and formatted it. So when you open it, you just see, like, for the first time when you buy a phone, you see hello in different languages. And from my boyfriend, they saw that he wrote to someone in social media like Slava Ukraini, which is glory to Ukraine. And one soldier says, why you do this? Are you Nazi or so? Then he just said, yeah.
Anastasia, I'm going to interrupt you because I want to talk to you about fleeing. I know it was frightening there, and you said one of them was playing with his gun, one was not too bad with you, but one was quite threatening. You can explain to me, but I believe they left and you were so frightened that you and your boyfriend packed up and you went to stay with a family member and you hid for a week and you didn't use your phones because you were afraid of being tracked. Just explain.
Yes, after they left our home, they called us back in 1 hour and said we should go to their office the next day, and we decided to escape. So we were hiding like for 1 week. I don't even know the address where we were. So after 1 week, we could find a way how to fled from Kherson. It was very, very frightening. We took very basic things with us, and every time when we passed the Russian block post, it was really, I don't know, my heart was just bleeding because every time I thought it's our last minutes. Yeah, and you know, we have Russian flags everywhere in Kherson.
I know, I was going to ask you about that. Anastasia, what did you think would happen? As you described it, your heart was ready to explode because you were terrified that you were going to be caught. What did you think would happen if you were found by the soldiers?
I thought we would be shot or kidnapped. And before leaving Kherson, I was thinking about what I would do if I find myself somewhere in Siberia or the Eastern Russia, because that's what they do now with people who don't like Russian politics, for example. And I was thinking, I was like building a plan where I would go, how I would speak to people in order to leave Russia.
I know, and you were studying abroad. You were living a life. Until this happened, you were happy living with your boyfriend. I know. We've got pictures of you at one of the protests after the Russian troops arrived, and it's with your friends. And I know you still have friends and people that you're very close to that are still in Kherson. I have about a minute left, Anastasia. How are they doing, and what do you want people that are watching this to understand about what Ukrainians are going through?
What we are going through, Before I had friends from Syria, and Afghanistan who told me about how they fled their countries, and I really couldn't understand the feelings that they had at that moment, even though they told me about all of this. But when I felt this on my own skin, I realized that even Ukrainians who are now abroad and who didn't hear all the explosions since the beginning of the war, they will never understand how it is. Every moment is like, you know, when you are in the amusement park, you are on the most dangerous, let's say, attraction, and you go up, you know, now you will fall. And when you're on the top, on the top, you feel how you feel. That's exactly how we feel every day.
Anastasia.
Every hour when we hear all those explosions.
I understand. Well, I don't understand, and I don't think anybody outside Ukraine really understands at this moment, but we do pray for you. Anastasia, stay safe, please, and we pray for you and your family.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching. I'm Julia Chatterley. Inside Africa is up next.
Along the coastline of southeastern Africa, something beautiful, something special is happening. A rebirth of the Afro surf scene.
This is growing. Surfing community is strong and there's a voice.
Amplifying the continent's deep undercurrents of surfing.
That's what this Afro surf thing is to me. It's hopefully a Trojan horse that gets people interested not only in the continent, but in the richness of its people and what it has to offer to the world.
This is not Australia or Hawaii. This is Mozambique. And this is Inside Africa. pristine, warm ocean waters, a hallmark of the coastline along Mozambique. And in the waters off the town of Tofu, chances are you'll see a whale shark too, an experience that attracts ocean lovers and divers from all over the world.
Tofu always been special. It's a very small town, but always had something special. It was always my favorite place. You get, how do you say it, hooked. When you come here, like, I want to stay here.
In recent years, this small fishing village has gained a reputation for another reason, as a sweet spot for surfing. One of the best in Mozambique.
We have a beautiful wave here, and it's a nice lineup.
Bruno Lopez is talking about a barreling right-handed break that is fast becoming a favorite among experienced surfers.
It's like very, very good feeling. You need to come and taste that.
Lopez is a geomatic engineer by trade, but he's also a surfer, and he's been coming to Tofu since he was a child.
We used to camp here. I come here with my parents, and then after 18, starting to come with my friends to party, and also to start when I was starting surfing.
Now in his mid-40s and a Tofu resident, Lopez says he's witnessed an incredible transformation in the town. A burgeoning Mozambican surf culture.
25 years when I came here, most of the person that will be at the beach to surf were foreigners, tourists, and were maximum 2, 3. Maybe 10 years ago, I came here and I saw 2 or 3 Mozambican guys surfing, and I was amazed. I was like, wow, what's going on here? I'm not going to say that it's already settled. This is growing, but I feel like surfing community is strong, and there's a voice. We have a voice, they have a voice.
I want to put Mozambique on the map because, first of all, Mozambique has incredible waves. And I don't think that Mozambique has been represented in terms of surf. And so, you know, I'm very lucky and blessed to be that first person to put Mozambique out there.
Part of the renaissance can no doubt be credited to some hometown surfers, like Sang-min Cho, known locally as Minnie, getting more and more recognition on the global surf scene.
I think in the last 3 years, we've seen a lot more in terms of Mozambican surfing, but I remember when I started surfing, there was no support, there was no sponsorship, because like a Mozambican surfing, like professionally, was unheard of. And so the new wave of African culture is surf, I think, you know.
Minnie is Mozambique's first ever professional surfer. The 22-year-old is ripping his way onto the World Surfing League qualifying series, earning international sponsorships.
Surfing has been the best thing that's happened to my life, for sure. I've been able to you know, have a job, travel the world, and represent my country. It was always a dream of mine to represent my country in some way.
Born in Mozambique to a Korean father and a Mozambican mother, Minnie started surfing at the age of 14 as a way to clear his head.
I had a lot of difficulties growing up at a young age, so surfing to me was an escape. To me, it's mind-blowing that us surfers are people riding the energy of the ocean, you know. And I think there's a big potential for a lot of Mozambican kids to make it big in the world in terms of surf.
Minnie's vision and success are just part of what's driving the rebirth of an Afro surf culture in Mozambique.
Minnie is a reference. His brother, Junior, is a reference. Armando is a reference. These kids are amazing. How exciting is being part of this continent at this moment. People have a voice, and that's why I think surf community becoming strong in small communities like this, I love what is happening.
And lining up to ride that wave is the next generation of up-and-coming surfers in Mozambique. there's a rising surf scene in Mozambique.
I think surfing in Dof especially is pretty much the hub of surfing in Mozambique, because in other places you don't have as many local surfers, you don't have as many surf schools and surf programs in such a small village.
Minnie Cho is the country's first professional surfer, and he's determined to grow the next generation of competitive surfers.
We're only beginning, but hopefully we have a lot more kids who are surfing better, and then maybe 2024 we'll have an Olympic team and we'll have some Mozambican kids representing Mozambique in the Olympics. And so that's a goal of mine.
To that end, Minnie is pouring his energy into the Tofu Surf Club, which introduces kids to the sport.
Definitely I've seen less kids in the streets, more kids in the water. We've seen a boom in Mozambican kids surfing. Tofu Surf Club has helped create a new wave of Mozambican surfers. A lot of kids surf here, but they're not as committed. Armando's probably the only surfer in the water that's going to be in the water before me. Because I used to be always the one who would be there at like 4:30 in the morning. And nowadays, Armando's in the water before I am. He's very dedicated and he's pushing it.
I love surfing because it's so fun. And when I'm in a wave, I feel like I forget all my problems. All I do like all day, I just in the wave and having a lot of fun, smiling.
17-year-old Armando is in the lineup of next-generation surfers in Tofu, waiting to catch the next big wave.
I started surf 2012, and I was not surfing every day because I was going to school also. But from 2014, I started to surf every day. Like the ocean just called me, Armando, just come to have fun here. And if I don't surf, I don't feel good. Narciso is my mentor. He's been explaining me a lot about surfing.
Narciso Namposa is a name you will hear a lot around Tofu. Before the kids here learn to surf, they have to learn how to swim. Narciso, a lifeguard and swim teacher, is known to use swim lessons to impart life lessons.
He's been teaching me, like, be a good guy, keep surfing, and yeah, he's been like my coach and explaining me about the life, keep surfing, and yeah, it's gonna change your life. Armando is one of the Nemos. I teach him how to swim. Now he's just ripping surfing. And I'm so proud of it.
For Narciso, just as important as growing the next generation of competitive surfers in Tofu is grooming guardians of the sea.
They have to build a passion with the sea first, and then they have to take care of it. The one thing I think that is the best is to teach them how to be safe in the water, take them snorkeling, then they will take care of the rubbish, collecting rubbish. So it's one of my thing that I'm proud of it, to teach kids how to swim and how to take care of it, and to understand what's the value of the sea. Surf teach me a lot of things, to look after my beach and to take care also of tofu and tofinho.
With the surf culture in Mozambique, Minnie says, comes character building.
And this is something that I also pass on to the kids. When you fall, you gotta stand back up and try again. And it's the same things that we teach the kids in surfing, you know? When you fall, you're not gonna be like, no, I'm out, I'm done, I don't wanna surf anymore. No, you wanna get back up and try again. And so that's a great life lesson that I learned. And also, when the opportunity comes, you gotta take it. You know, you sit out there, you wait, you can wait 20, 30 minutes for a bomb. And when a set comes in and it's a good wave, you gotta go, turn and just make the most of it. And so I think it's the same with life. You know, when the opportunity comes, you gotta take it and you gotta make the most of it. Surfing has taught me a lot, but I think I still have a lot more to learn.